Hello and welcome to episode 117 of The Imperial Truth. Joining me for the intro, we have community social media manager, Rob Ing.
Good evening, Greg. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, steady away. A bit warm, but not too bad.
That's Northern talk for the American listeners and the Australians and the Canadians and the whatever. I have no idea what he said.
Oh, sorry, I'm a bit hot.
Yeah, indeed. So there we go. It is. It's
Subtitles may be available in the show notes.
Absolutely right. Yeah, no, that's a lot of effort. So yeah, we're here and we're ready to do the intro. And then this episode is pretty much it's just us continuing our Horus Heresy reading order. I started recording with Michael. I had plans for the rest of the episode, and then it took 2 hours. So that's enough for this episode. So that's all good fun. So apologies if you're not as into that, but yeah, that's what we've done. But before we move on, Element Games, go buy all your toys from Element Games because they're wonderful. There are some people cheaper, there are some people with as good a service, but you get combined from Element. They've just revamped their website, which is always confusing when you first go there when someone does that.
Yeah, it's taken a pasted from me this weekend. I've put some money their way this weekend. Quite a bit. Yes,
I've forgotten to add on the last couple of little bits. I was like, I've dropped 100 and whatever quid on there. I bought all my Sylvaneth for Age of Sigmar, all the updated stuff, and some Titans, some Knights for Titanicus, the Castus Knights, and bits and pieces. And good stuff. I love Elements, so hopefully that will all be with us on Saturday, which is cool. Nice. Not that I've got any time to do it next weekend away for an event, and Saturday itself on the Sunday, and then the Saturday itself will be painting for said event, trying to get 48 Sisters of Silence, all painted after writing a list with 48 and having 4 or 5 painted at that point in time, and 6 of them, including Janisha Kroll, to be put together as well. Schoolboy.
It's all motivational. Deadlines are good.
I just thought that's all right. I've not got too many sisters in that, and I've got a couple painted. And it was like, actually, I've written a list with 48 sisters in it, and the list isn't stunning either. It was like as I was driving around work the next day, I was like, what do I do if I face a Spartan?
Die horribly. Ignore
it, and it will go away. So we got a few Talons bits in there. We're not completely useless. So we'll see.
I was going to say, is it 48 sisters and then 3 Telemans? In which case the sisters aren't going to be a problem.
Only own 1 Teleman. I've got 2 the Venatari, the flying dudes. I think they're cool. I've got I think it's 2 units of 4, one of each of the shield dudes and the spear dudes. I've got a Tribune. And I think that's all the custody stuff. And then I've got 2 units of grenade launcher sisters. So if someone brings some psychers, I can force some psychic tests. And they can fire crack grenades as well. So that's cool. And then I've got 5, the HQ unit. So there's 5 sisters in there with the crossbow guns, which can also do the psychic thing as well. Janisha Kroll's cool.
Beautiful model as well.
Yeah,
I've been really tempted just to pick her up just as a painting project.
I think in combat, any hits of 5 or 6 count as instant death or something like that. So there's potential there, which is cool. And she's got so for people who don't know, haven't looked at the sisters, you choose a company cadre. Something is the rule, and you choose one of 4 rules. So you can give all your sisters infiltrate, which I'm probably going to do because that's fun. And then Janisha Kroll also allows 3 units to, I think it's 3 or D3, to scout. So I can have some custodies up the board a little bit quicker than they normally would be as well, which is quite quick.
Just what everybody wants.
Yeah, so, but I've only got the Teleman. That's the only vehicle I've got and stuff. But and then there's a load of sisters with swords and a few sisters with bolt guns. And then we had to do a Zone Mortalis list as well, and I've chucked some sisters with flamers in there rather than the bolt guns, because they can go to strength 6 for a turn as well. I think their flamers.
God!
I don't think
strength 6 rend in.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't think you can use him again for the rest of the game. It's something like that. I'll have to double check the rules, but you can
you
do
get
that
that
for
right in Zone Mortalis. You don't have to use them again
No,
for the rest
exactly.
of the game. The game's over.
It's all fun, isn't it? So So if by some quirk of fate I get some demons or something like that, it could be quite fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
But as you're right, it's an excuse to get the sisters painted. I kind of generally bought loads, and I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to buy loads more to get 48. And I've looked around, and I think I've got 50 models. So I was like, that's a result.
Yeah, it's not unsurmountable. I'm sure you'll be all right. If they're all sprayed already, then
we'll see.
The 3/4 done then.
See what happens this week. It's typical, isn't it? It was like, okay, well, I've got this weekend. Okay, but that half day's gone, because instead of having the whole Sunday to paint, we're now having family over for a barbecue, and I'm like, oh, sad panda.
Can't I sit on my own with my little toys rather than being sociable?
Can I put the cricket on and just paint all day?
Yeah.
No, I have to meet people. But there we go. Such is life. And then through the week, you guarantee you lose the odd evening that you didn't foresee losing. So.
Oh yeah, I've managed to do nothing today. I've had my son all day today, and normally I can at least sit at the kitchen table while he's watching a film of some description or pottering about and do something. And today he's just had none of it. He's like, no, Daddy do this, Daddy do that. And I've been like, oh, I've got Solar Auxilia to do.
Yeah.
But, I've been playing parent instead.
It's all part of the fun. Yeah. So I've got a load of bases sat here ready to get painted and everything else. But you posted up your Solar Auxilia. You've gone a different route. You've gone down the Anvil route. That's right.
Yes, I've gone non-GW, non-Forge World. Went down the Anvil Regiments route.
Sure.
Saved me quite a bit of money, not going to lie. But also it's just that bit different. The solar sculpts have never quite sat right with me, I don't think. It's that whole steampunky kind of thing, which I love the steampunk aesthetic, but I don't normally associate it with Workshop.
Sure.
So the odd times it crops up, like in some of the Mechanicum tank, like the Krios Venator and stuff like that, and in the solar, part of me is kind of like, it's not gelling for me. The solar command unit is utterly beautiful.
Yeah. But
the rank and file fellas part, I'm just kind of like, not sure they quite are what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
And then the Anvil ones, I think they worked out at something like 12 quid per 10 cheaper, which when you're talking infantry numbers you need for Solar Auxilia, it soon adds up.
Yeah, it's always the problem with Forge World, larger scale armies.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've got quite a few tanks. I've built 2 Valdor tank hunters and a Malcador Infernus the day before the FAQ dropped, and the Malcador chassis took a serious kick in, and I was like, really? Were you just watching me in my workshop going, yeah, Rob's finished the glue on that one? Like, because it was literally 11 o'clock at night, finished gluing the last one. I was like, right, brilliant, they're done. Next morning the FAQ drops. Your Malcador chassis are more easily destroyed than they were. I won't say they're no good, because the Malcador Infernus, the gun hasn't changed. No. So if I get a shot off, it's still going to do as much damage as it ever did. But I can now be pinged off with one, lucky las cannon shot or whatever.
Yeah, it's slightly more vulnerable. There's that. Unfortunately, 30k Age of Darkness rules don't have that happy medium between super heavy and tank. It could have heavy tank. They could do something with that, and that's something.
They said shortly after. I think Anoush posted shortly after, because obviously men went on the internet after the FAQ and made an interesting showing of themselves, shall we say? And he said, "Well, steady on. This isn't the final version of Malcador rules forever. They might change in the future. This hasn't. This isn't a permanent until the end of time thing. Things will be constantly looked at, and if it turns out that they're not what they should be, then we'll move them back a bit." So
yeah, I mean, I've said before, I have an issue with the all or nothing armor. The problem, I think for whatever you feel about the word toughness, 40k I think works in terms of damaging tanks.
There needs to be some kind of degradation on super heavies, even if you just get the rules wrong, like the first time I used one and managed to let someone destroy a weapon.
Yeah.
We
used to be able to do that. You used to have the primary weapon rule, so you could ignore that on 4+ if it was your main weapon. That something like that. The ability, I think, Immobilize slowed them down a little bit. But even then, even with things like Spartans, like it feels like you either do nothing to it or you take it out in one go, and that's it's already a game of rock paper scissors sometimes. And I think
when you've saved 9 or 10 cover saves on a Spartan, and it's still shooting at full effect, and it should have theoretically taken like 10 hull points or something, even though it doesn't have that many.
Yeah, or even if you just roll slightly badly with your, sometimes you get to that point where you're like, well, is there any point in me shooting at that thing? And that's not great. And this is a minor thing, really. Every now and then it becomes a thing in a game, I feel. So I would like some review of that down the line. I think.
I think there needs to be some. I wouldn't mind if it was a sort of more streamlined version, almost of, if you remember what Second Dead was like, where you had locations. That kind. I mean, it's more bookkeeping, maybe. But
I don't think it's the way they would go.
No, probably isn't. But
I think a simple. I could see them not changing normal vehicles at all, and that's fair enough.
Normal vehicles are fine. I think they're fine.
Sometimes I'm a little bit with that, but that's cool. I can take that or leave that. That is a personal thing. But super heavies, definitely, I think they should have thresholds within there where, certainly their speed goes down, because 12-inch movement all the time is
when you've got 1 hull point left out of 12, it's like really,
absolutely, and weapons being able to be stop using it. The old system I thought worked fine. If you've got a glaive and you hit that primary weapon, there's a 4-up chance not to kill it, or maybe there'd be something where you can repair it, or it can repair all the time. Yeah. But if you've got something like a Bane Blade and you take off all the little guns, at least you're doing something in that respect.
Yeah. It just needs to be like a split profile of, above this many hull points left unaffected, below half hull points this happens, below a quarter this happens, or something.
There's lots of different ways to do it. And they can be tweaked for vehicles as well, for different types of vehicles. But definitely seeing a super heavy run round on 1 hull point, still moving 12 inches, still firing all of its guns at multiple targets.
What's actually wrong with it then? If it's taken 11 of its 12 hull points, but it's still doing everything. And
also sometimes, because it can do that, you sit there and think, well, it's going to take me 2 turns to kill it minimum. 2, maybe 3. Is it worth 3 of my turns shooting at it, or am I going to shoot everything else? That's a decision, and in some games it's fine again, but in some games it's literally like, well, I'm just going to let it do what it does, but that's not engaging. I hope it's something they've got on their radar for the 2nd edition of Age of Darkness rules. But I still use them. It doesn't stop me wanting to play against super heavies.
No, I'll still be bringing my 3 Malcadors or 3 Malcador chassis to Blood and Glory.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I just think it would improve most games that they're in, and because there's the way armor works as well. There is that aspect of, at least in 40k, you don't ever get to that point where you can't do something.
Yeah.
And it can
always.
It can happen in 30k. It's not, a good general will get round it most of the time, and a good list building and all that. But every now and then you get to this thing where it's like, half my army's useless because of the way the table's set up and the way you've used that. Okay, that's, okay. I just have to wait till my opportunity where I'm allowed to do stuff, which isn't ideal.
Yeah.
But, yeah, who knows? But yeah, so the Anvil stuff, because that's where we came from.
Yeah, sorry, it's back on topic.
Yeah, they make some good stuff, I must admit.
It's beautiful stuff. I've got one of them in my hand here because I was measuring how tall he was for some foam. And if people aren't familiar, the Anvil Industry, a little UK-based company based out of London, and they make legs, bodies, heads, arms, and guns, basically, and backpacks and bits. But you can mix and match anything.
Yeah.
So with everything they've got so far, it's something like 800,000 possible combinations. So you can make very close approximations to Deathcore Krieg, for example. They aren't Deathcore Krieg. There is a noticeable difference. But if you want that great coat, gas mask, World War One kind of look, yeah, you've got that. They've got medieval style helmets, but slightly sci-fi'd up. So that whole kind of low sci-fi. They've got more high sci-fi stuff.
It's perfect for even more than solar. It's perfect for militia, where you've got the different provenances, and you want stuff to stand out as being like, chemically jacked or being the old units, all that kind of stuff. You've got a lot of options in there. They also do some Space Marine parts as well.
Yes.
Some bionics particularly, which.
And alternate weapons as well. I've used them a lot on my wolves. All my wolves have got bolt pistols from them because they do, I think it's 5 bolt pistols, or
cool.
Not bolt pistols. It's like £3.
Yeah.
And they do left-handed pistol grip, so you can have a guy with a pistol in a left hand or a right hand to go on power armor, which is pretty useful. And a sprue of theirs like £2. So they're really reasonable.
Yeah, and there are good little companies out there all over the shop. Anvil's one I keep looking at, I must admit.
I've never had anything miscast off them. I've never had any issues with stuff not turning up. When I've emailed them about things just in general, customer service has been spot on there. The first place I go to, if it's not Forge World, the first place I look is Anvil. Cracking stuff.
That's cool. And obviously, your mileage is going to vary on whether you like their aesthetics that they've got, but there's a wide range of choice there. That's cool.
Yeah, with 800,000 combinations, I'm pretty sure anybody can find something. There's a nifty little sort of sub-site to their website where you can click on all the options and build a sort of get a 3D render of what your basic trooper looks like for selecting your options and whatnot.
Well, that's cool. I didn't know that. Been trying to avoid looking at them except for parts I desperately need. So.
Yeah, and for militia as well, they get cheaper the more you buy.
All right, that's cool.
So if you buy, for example, my solar, I've gone all Velitaris, so it's all Volkite fellas.
Yeah.
So that's their special ops unit. You get 9 special weapon troopers, and they've got a gun that's got, I think they call it an ion rifle, but it's close enough to a Volkite for anybody looking at it to know what it's meant to be.
Yeah.
But for the riflemen, they do, I think it starts at £24 for a unit of 10, I think it is. But then if you buy like the platoon or the brigade and you're buying 6 units of 10 or 8 units of 10, then that slowly drops down. And you get a discount on stuff like your command sections and your accessory packs for officers or sergeants and things like that. So everything gets cheaper the more you buy. So if you plan your list out and think, right, well, I need 120 of these guys or whatever, get it all at once, you get it even cheaper.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's any of those kind of horde armies, as we say, in resin from Forge World are a big investment.
Not hard.
I think that's really cool. Yes, and you're hoping to bring that all to Blood and Glory, yeah?
That should be ready it will be ready for the beginning of November. Yeah, I need to sort out my accommodation and travel as yet, but it is booked in. Luckily it's a fortnight before my birthday, so basically I don't have to pay for anything.
Oh, good times.
My other half gets me the ticket mother-in-law gets me a hotel, and only thing I have to do is a bit of beer money, which has generally arrived in early arriving birthday cards already.
Result.
Yeah, it's so yeah. Don't ever change the date on that one.
That's not down to me, I'm afraid. that is other people. Yeah, and I know we've been talking about the tickets for this going on sale soon. They are going on sale soon. Unfortunately, that soon's been going on a while. Ben, who runs it, has had got extremely busy. In good reasons. His business is doing very well, and the organisation has had. When you're doing these things, stuff comes up that has to be adapted and changed and whatever. We know that if Blood and Glory continues on, then we have to change the organisational structure. So we should be getting tickets very soon. I really hope they are. I've been pushing for you guys. I know had a few emails about when they're coming out. We will be. I can't remember if I said this last time or not, but we will be doing Adeptus Titanicus and 30k. The Titanicus will be a small event again. I think we're going to be in the same room, so we've got exactly the same numbers available that we had last time. So we're going to split it. I think it works out 50-20, or maybe it's 60-20 in favour of Heresy. So yeah, that should be good fun when we finally get all that up.
If it's anything like last year, it'll be me that's doing the pack for you again. So as soon as you know, I can get on the case with that.
Yeah, I think I've given Ben like the basic one, but yeah, we'll as I say, that it'll be coming up soon. So.
And, I'll pop it up on the Facebook as soon as it's as soon as it's approved and everyone can get a hold of it.
And if anyone is waiting, like as soon as those tickets go live and I find that out, I'll be putting it all over Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So you'll, if you follow those, you'll be among the first to know.
Jolly good.
Cool. Right. I can't remember if Ralderon was out last episode, but
me neither. He is now, though.
He is now. He is. He's there in all his glory. I like him actually. I think he's really cool.
With or without, as I believe the internet calls it, the boyfriend unit.
Yeah. His retinue.
Which I think gets you a slight discount on the retinue.
I think so.
Because Terminator units are what, about, I think the 63 for the Paladins?
Might be.
Some Paladins, Ralderon's 47.
Yeah, 47 is
steep.
It's quite a chunk, to be fair.
It is.
He's
not even got that massive a bit. Well, he has got a big base, but it's...
it's a decent sized base. It is... that's getting to the point where, but it's a character series model. I do think he is fantastic. If I was playing Blood Angels, I'd get him, I think, at that price. But I would be thinking, and that
I've seen some people not liking the pose.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I don't get that. I really do. I think it's the kind of pose that I think's been overlooked.
There is, anything where they're not action killing stuff tends to go down less well. The problem with that is if they're all action-y killing stuff, then that becomes normal, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's no variation. His pose, if you changed his left arm, the one that's holding the cloth, his pose is actually quite similar to what's his chops? Sigismund.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And everyone loves Sigismund, and he's one of the oldest ones, so he's got one of the best poses.
Yeah.
Ralderon is pretty much a mirror, other than the left hand wiping the sword.
There's also, saw it with the White Scar guy who was stationary, and some people are like, there's no movement in the model, and I'm like, I think there is. I think it's very clear to see this guy's in the middle of, is the calm in the storm. And although it's a stationary static pose,
is it the Praetor?
Is it the Praetor? I can't try to remember who it was now. Anyway, I think
something on internet.
But I think this guy, I think Ralderon as well, is he's not doing a lot, but you visualize with that hand on that sword, you visualize exactly what he's doing, and it doesn't sit there and scream to me, this guy's standing there doing nothing. It's like, no, this guy's taking that time to clean his sword off after destroying what is a huge beast.
Was it the Cataphracti fellow with the budgie?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. You see, he's got implied movement. He's taking in what's going on, and he's in Cataphracti Terminator armor. He's not exactly going to be.
But that just feels to me like, he's calm, he's cool.
There's an implied threat in the pose.
Yeah,
it's just he's not mid swing, but not everything has to be mid swing.
Yeah, absolutely. When you, it's character series is an interesting thing, and it's never going to be great for everyone. But just looking up that White Scar, the White Scar Legion Praetor is still a great model. The guy in power armor running, it's £22. He's half the price of Raldoron. But they are slightly different. As I say, one is a specific character piece. And you do get that other stuff with him. It does make it harder to swallow. I appreciate that.
That is tough to justify when he's £11 more than Janisha Kroll. Yeah, and I know which model I prefer, and I have no preference over Blood Angels to Silent Sisterhood. It's not that I'm an anti-Ninth Legion type person. I just think the Kroll model is better. And to be honest, we all know that resin is not expensive when you're buying it in bulk. So that the amount of
the problem is they work on percentages, like any company will, and the percentage cost, the percentage profit of a Forge World piece is ridiculously high because of all the costs are up front in design and everything else. And so I kind of don't mind that. Unfortunately, as the model becomes bigger, you are paying for stuff. With the character series, you're paying for those bases as well, which is galling for those people who don't really care.
It'd be nice to see some of them made available without the model, if that makes sense. No, it'll never happen, but it's what Heresy Trading's for, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how many people do want these little... Yeah, if you are one of those, someone will want that base, and you might not get a huge amount for it, but... whatever you get back is money saved, isn't it?
I've been after a Horus base for ages, and I always miss them. I always miss them, but I want Horus's base.
Have you put up a want to buy on the Facebook page, or are you just waiting?
Yes.
Oh, right, okay.
Yes, I generally have a knack of putting it up the day after. I just sold mine last week, or I just sold mine yesterday. And
so if anyone's got one, Rob's after one. So I did mention, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this last episode, but I will re-mention it. The bundles are still up there for the Sicarans and the Leviathans. And you save a little bit. So it all depends whether you want 3 Leviathan. The 3 Leviathan one is not so bad because you can equip them differently. The Sicaran is the battle tank. So I think it's more if you want a cup 1 or 2 and a mate or 2 wants the other ones. You do save a smidge on those. I can't remember what it was. It was like something about 15 quid on them or whatever. It was enough to make you think, oh, okay. If you feel like jumping in on them, then they're still up there just to keep you informed. And then
everybody needs more Leviathan Dreadnoughts. I think they're probably my favourite model in the whole.
Yeah, they're cool.
In the whole range.
They're cool. It's having to buy the drop pod to go with them. That starts to get expensive.
Well, yes, that's true. Yeah, that would be a bundle that would sell, I think, if they did a decent deal on that. Yeah,
but probably best they don't. And then, from GW, we have had the Acastus Knights released put up on pre-order for Adeptus Titanicus. You can get the Knights and the dice, the Legio dice, and the Knight, I think the Knight banner card terminals from independent retailers, and then from GW itself, you've got things like the Loyalist and Traitor Stratagems cards and the named Titan Knight, name Legios Titans as well for the different
special
legions.
character titans.
Yeah, they're the ones. So you can only get those bits from GW Direct. And unfortunately, with the way the demand's gone and the amount of printing they have done, it's one of those things where I was just like, right, I'm buying them. And then if I have too many, I can sell on a few of the terminals or whatever, because I'm making sure I get them.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about those. I put an order in for the upgrade sprues.
Yeah, I'm still going to do that for Forge World.
On Thursday, and I was like, oh damn, those are the new things. I should have pre-ordered them at the same time.
Yeah, I've got to get some Warlord. Mind you, I haven't got time to paint them at the moment.
Although I'm still waiting on my copy of Titan Death, which has been on back order for a month, because I believe that's somewhere between the British coast and China.
Yeah, they've had some good old some of the fallout from Brexit and everything else.
Oh God, he's mentioned the B word. That's it.
I'm not going to get into it beyond that, but there are some delays going on. I don't think it's just that either. I think China have. There's other things going on in the world that is way beyond us, and it affected Age of Sigmar with the Sylvaneth getting really held up. I think GW are looking at other options now, being less tied up, particularly with printing from China. Unfortunately, China's cheap. And that in itself is an ethical question that we won't get into. But
industrial printers aren't, regardless of anything else. That would be.
Yeah, exactly. And I also know that GW had some issues with some of the Chinese people they've been using, and the communication hasn't always been stellar. And small issues, but when you're dealing with large numbers of stuff, small issues can cause big problems. So. It'll be interesting to see what GW do moving along that way. But yeah, and bearing in mind as well that how well they are doing. We've had not long ago we had the announcement that they'd given every member of staff the $2,500, was it?
Yep, something like that.
So they had record sales again. They went up, and it's not just it's not just the figures looking good. Like, they are good. You can find the articles and whatever. It's healthy growth.
It's like 15% in the last year or something. They announced the other week.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, some of that's video games and things like that as well, and all those little other bits they're doing now with the Funko Pops and all the clothing they're doing. But actually, they should have been doing that a long time ago.
We're all looking forward to seeing you in your leggings at Cardiff.
Yeah, absolutely. You do wonder if they'd gone with Blizzard and allowed them the license, and WoW was instead, World of Warhammer.
Well, as someone who's waiting for the re-release of what that did become next month, I'm desperately painting now because I know what happened to every spare second I had back in 2005 when the original game came out. Yeah, that would have been.
It would have been interesting
ridiculous.
Because
at one point Blizzard were making nearly £1 billion a month on subscribers and new game purchases when Warcraft went mental. Yeah. And if Workshop had a share of that 15 years ago.
Absolutely. You just got, as I say, the money you would have earned from that licensing in itself, and the licensings that have come off of it, things like Hearthstone and blah blah blah, so much stuff. But also it would have broken that attitude that GW had to licensing at the time, which was basically being scared of it because they tried to do their own stuff and had their fingers burnt. They got it wrong, and they were left with one of the major things. Was it Black Industries, where they made loads of stuff and had it sat in a warehouse for years because they just couldn't shift it because they got it wrong. And had that worked, if we'd been that long ago moving down the licensing method, Funko Pops are out there now. Listening to latest Age of Empire, and Michael said that there were like the 5 or 6 people behind him in the queue were Funko Pop collectors. Yeah. Your brand is spreading that way as well. On top of that, you've got the clothing and everything else, and that we said that Space Marine silhouette should be it should be the Hello Kitty of it's. It should be like that.
Yeah, it should be as recognisable as a Coca-Cola bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you can do that, it opens up so much stuff. Money making becomes so many different revenues that even if they do have a bad year with something, it doesn't affect them. And that's good. If they can do that right, that becomes good for the hobby because it makes it more stable. They don't have to rely on it, just so long as they don't lose the focus, which I don't think they would do.
No, I don't think so.
I think they're
big enough that they could employ people to, this is your focus. We are going to carry on doing.
And that's what they do. They have the licensing department that works with all the licensing. And if that needed to, that, in fact, no, they took on that person to deal with TV and film, didn't they? They put out a job description for that role. So they can obviously break licensing down again, which is something I think they've shown they're good at kind of sorting out that compartmentalising, whether they get the right people in or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes less so. But they're good at understanding what they need to do now, I believe.
I keep seeing the adverts going up for the jobs they are offering, and it's like, if I could drive, it's only an hour to Nottingham. Yeah. From mine. Yeah. And it's like, I'd be sorely tempted to apply.
So yeah, it's good to see that, and also as well, unfortunately, the kind of announcements of major profits always spark the reactionary internet things of where they can bring the prices down. It's, as gamers, we should be happy that they're making that much money. And yes, prices of this stuff could be cheaper. Yes, if I spent less of my money and got the same amount of stuff, I would be happy. But GW making healthy profit, which gets reinvested back in and gets utilised properly, is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, even the staff, like, there's, reinvesting back in, they gave every staff member, I think it was £2,600, something like that. That's every Games Workshop staff member. How much of that bonus do you think went straight back into Games Workshop?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I was chatting to Mr. Barfield last time. I was down at head office. I presume most of his bonus went on his holiday to Japan. I hope it was fun, by the way, Ed. But like, how many hobbyists will have gone, well, I've got $2,500. Right, I'm having a Titan.
Yeah, I'm having I'm having that thing I've always wanted, or that army I've always wanted.
Giant corn dragon for Age of Sigmar, or something ludicrous that they would never normally get.
Absolutely.
Either have the disposable cash or spousal permission to go, you know what? Yeah. I'm gonna have that.
When we moved house, the way we moved house meant our money was a bit funny, but blah, blah, blah. But I actually pulled some money out of my sale of my flat and we used it for different things. And I was like, okay, we've got this much left over. Sure, I'm going to get that piece of Warhammer art that I wanted. And rather than get the canvas, I'm actually going to go full aluminium, full size. That's the most expensive piece of art I'm ever going to buy. But we had that money there at that time. And it's if we don't do it now, I'm not going to do it. So
yeah, cool. I was told when me and the missus moved into this one, when we've got the house sorted, you can buy a Smaug.
Yeah,
and I was like, fantastic, brilliant, and didn't get around to it. And by the time I started getting around to it, turns out that there was going to be a baby arriving. So I was like, all right, I'll buy a pram instead.
Yeah, and we don't always make the best decisions. Sometimes we shouldn't be buying the things we buy, but when the money's sitting there and it comes in as a windfall, as free money. As we view it, then that's when we do spend. But you're right, and it goes in like that. But
Workshop are entitled to make a profit.
Yeah,
they are entitled to make a profit. They're not a charity.
But it's good for businesses like that to make that profit as well, because that encourages the growth within the thing. As soon as things start to get tight, you will inevitably get people worried, looking at stripping back, and that's even whilst they're still making a profit potentially. At the end of the day, we've had a price hike recently. I say price hike, I kind of hate the way that sounds. We've had some increased prices across Forge World and some GW stuff recently, and some of them seem a little bit weird in how much has gone on. Some of them seem actually fine. I don't think we've had a price rise for quite a while. Forge World, obviously they did the regional pricing, which worked out as a price rise, but I don't think.
But it wasn't. It wasn't a flat price rise. Percentile increase, was it?
No, it wasn't a price rise. It was a readjusting of their sales method across the regions. I honestly, that again, that's a difference. And if you're in America and you're paying a lot more, do you care what the reasons are? Probably not. Fair play. But, we used to get the annual price rise, and I'm trying to remember if we had price rises last year. I can't think we did. So it's going to happen. With something like this particularly, it's going to happen. It's going to push the odd person out of the hobby. Fair enough. You make your decision, or out of the Games Workshop side of things. Everyone's got their line in the sand or whatever. I don't think there's anything that I've seen. There's a couple, as I say, like Rowderon. Oh, blimey,
Yeah,
that's a bit high. And there's a few other things where I was like, oh, that's a bit. What they put on that model is, oh, that's a little bit much. But then for a couple of quid on something else, I'm like, cool, it's a couple of quid. Okay, it adds up, yeah, fine. But, nothing ever gets cheaper, really. Not without some kind of weird reason.
And it's not like it's an essential thing for existence either.
No, absolutely.
It's the least... This is going to sound really not positive about the hobby, which is not true because I've never been any more positive. But there couldn't be anything that was less important as far as survival as a human being.
Yeah, it's
concerned.
Yeah, it's it's hobby. It's a hobby product, and therefore it holds a different value when money becomes an important thing. And I wonder how much some of this price is what's going on with where the UK sits at the moment in terms of yes, they do stuff on site, but where are they getting where's their printing going? Where's their resin coming from? Where's their plastic coming from? Where are their machines getting to? Where's that metal coming from? Those things can have an effect, as well as inflation.
Yeah.
So, you're never going to convince someone who thinks something's too expensive that it's not. It very rarely happens.
Yeah, I used to describe it when I was, I used to wear the shirt. I used to be paid to toe the company line to greater or lesser extent, and it used to be a standard thing then with parents. They'd come in and looking at 40k, and this is 10 years ago, and they'd be like, "Oh God, this is expensive," and I'd be like, "Yeah, it is." If you buy something, clag it together, dip it in a pot of emulsion and go, yeah, that'll do. A 20 quid model is expensive and is an extravagance and is a luxury. But then thinking about it more, moving that on to the way that I perceive the Heresy community as a more mature, age-wise at least, community. If people are going out and working all day and working hard, they come back, they've got some money, they want something to enjoy it. If someone buys, looking on the Forge World site at the moment, White Scars Leviathan Dreadnought with Siege Claw and Storm Cannon, £76. Some people are like 76 quid for a little toy that's shorter than a can of Lynx deodorant, And like, yeah, but if that gives someone 10, 12 hours of enjoyment of building and painting, not even getting to the playing games with it, then that's less than £5 an hour.
Yeah, and the other thing is,
which for your enjoyment, you can spend that's what, a pint and a half.
Yeah,
probably not even a pint if you're in London.
We went out for a family meal recently, and we went to a pub restaurant which had a good reputation, and we had whatever. I was fine with the prices as we were ordering. The food was okay. Mm-hmm. And we spent between just me and my wife Emma, Mrs. Truth. We spent over 50 quid. I don't drink. Yeah. She had one reasonably, going to be expensive drink. We had a dessert each, and it was over 50 quid. And I looked at it and went, that meal wasn't worth 50 quid.
I mean, I'm up in the north where everything's apparently cheaper, and even going to a national chain somewhere like Wagamama's.
Yeah, that's
me and my other half can go to Wagamama's in Leeds, which we're not like Jack from Anvil's a Corner going and having dinner at Claridge's. Yeah, don't think I didn't spot that. Me and the missus going to Wagamama's is over 50 quid in Leeds.
Yeah.
It's not like we're going to the Ivy in central London or anything like that. And,
yeah. So if you cut one of them back a month.
Yeah.
And there's if some people eat out, that's their thing. So yeah, but I think we've probably talked. I just want to, it's just one of those things where I try not to demean people's issues with paying.
Everybody has their different priorities and different circumstances.
My financial circumstances are a lot different than they were 4 months ago, and that has had an impact in how what I'm looking at going forwards. I'm selling a lot of stuff, and it's paid. I've sold way more monetary values worth than I've spent on the hobby this year, and I've got a lot more to sell, and that's a conscious effort on my part, is to get rid of a lot of that stuff. But I also don't want to look at it the other way and worry us, blah blah blah. It's expensive. We'll like to kind of look for reasons why these things happen, because understanding is half the battle. You can still disagree with it once you understand it, but at least you're coming from a point where you've generally, like there aren't many decisions that GW make where you sit there and go, where I sit there and think, no, I really just don't get where you come from with that.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it can be like, not sure you should have done it.
I think the discontinuation of the macro carried might be one of those that's happened recently that I think has happened since the last episode.
Oh yes, should have said we had some last chances to buy. Is it getting so? There's some talk about it getting remade, mold redone. Although some people have said, well, normally it just goes out of stock if that happens. I don't think the logic always applies.
Have they done it because the Dreadnought drop pod was out of stock?
Yeah.
For 2 years?
Yeah, exactly.
And have they just taken it off because maybe the mould has had some catastrophic failure like the old Dreadnought drop pod one did, and they went, right, we'll just put it on last chance to buy. We've got this many in the stock room. Yeah, and then we're not gonna. We're in that way. Are they managing expectations with people going, I can't get them anymore?
But there's also, if it comes back in a different, I don't know if the macro arid was in a box or not. I suspect it was, which is an issue. But if they're reboxing stuff, then they change the SKU, they change the number, the item number.
Which means they've got to remove it completely from the website.
So it has to go last chance to buy because it will not exist as an item.
That should be then sort of communicated as well. This is on last chance to buy because we're reboxing it, or this is on last chance to buy because we're retooling it. Yeah,
and we talked about Forge World communication in this aspect before. I think it is somewhere that they lack and they don't get right. They could easily have kind of put out a thing about something else, even if it's right. This is basically we're taking off items that haven't sold as much. Cool, they may come back. We've talked before about if Forge World open up a period of print on demand, essentially, kind of a window for people to purchase things that are less popular, then I think that will be a really big sales boost for them at certain points in those times. And if they announce it a month before it happens.
Yeah, give people a bit of time to do some financial planning for it.
But also Forge World need to make... But yeah, that's the problem. Is Forge World then need to make sure that they're ready for a rush of extra sales, but whilst also not being able to guarantee that rush is coming. So,
it's a tricky one to manage.
It is a tricky one. And someone's going to be the last person, if they did that for, say, the macro arid, like throw it out there. So it went to... print on demand effectively. Someone will be the last person to get theirs, and it might take 2 weeks. And then they're going, where's my model? Where's my model? It might take longer. And then you have to deal with that side of things as well. And, we had, we're recording this the day, the day the second book in the Siege of Terror series has started to reach people. 2,500 copies, limited to one per order. I believe there was some talk that GW went in and people who then ordered one, ordered a second one, ordered the third one on separate orders. I heard some talk that some people had theirs cancelled. I don't know how true that is. 50 copies have ended up on eBay. And people are like, well, it didn't work. And I'm like, well, it did work because it took 7 minutes to sell out. 7 minutes to sell out in the UK, 20 minutes to sell out in the US. That was enough time if you were online. And because they were using GW and it deals with much more traffic, it was stable for that whole period of time, unlike Black Library. 7 minutes is enough time for you, if you are on it and aware and whatever, to be online to order it. And I ordered mine at 2 minutes too. So actually, bearing in mind they were going, it was 9 minutes. So you've got people going, well, 50 up online. Well, that's because 50 people want to make money.
Yeah, and all it takes is, I mean, I'm in a WhatsApp group with. I'm the only. I think there's only one other person in the WhatsApp group of the gamers from York that I used to knock about with. There's only one other guy that plays Heresy. Every single one of them knows what's coming out, and every single one of the rest of them knows that limited edition books you can make a profit on. Everybody in the hobby knows that. You're never going to eliminate that entirely because somebody is going to go. That's going to go out. That's going to go out of stock. It's no different to people buying things like buying toys, keeping them in the wrappers.
Yeah, Beanie
going,
Babies.
I'll sell that in 20 years' time.
Absolutely. And the only way you stop it is by not having limited editions, but then you don't have, in this case, beautiful, beautiful books. I'm only about a 20th of the way through the Solar War at the moment. I've only just started it. I've fallen a bit behind, but I've seen the pictures that people have been posting today of the map of the Imperial Palace that's in the new book. Lost and the Damned. And the other thing is people were saying, well, just do they did it before. One, you just have a week's order period, but you do that. And then, for a start, you don't get the book for another however long because it's then got to be all sent off to be put with all the other pages. And so there's a big period of time when people complain about that.
Standard of printing, that standard of presentation is not quick.
No, absolutely. And then you've also got the fact that then the more you print, the less limited it is as an edition, which, some people don't like. But then you've got the major fact that in reality, there's probably, I'm going to, wild, numbers, generalising here, blah, 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 blah. There's probably 2,750 people, 3,000 people who want this book. So you're only doing it for an extra 500 people at most, I would say. I would suspect there's only a few hundred people really that miss out on these things.
I would love them. I'm not maybe as far down the path as the path of the bibliophile as Michael, the book exarch, who's stuck on that path and can't leave it. But I appreciate, the Forge World Black books, the limited edition books. They are absolutely stunning, and I would love to own them and have them on display. But if I looking at the Solar War, for example, I saw it coming out. I was like, oh, God, that's a really pretty book. I know there's only 8 of them, so there's a finite expenditure that I can account for, but I don't have anywhere really to display them.
Sure.
And 50 quid, I'd rather have a Deradeo, and I'll just buy Solar War when it comes out on the Kindle.
There's also it's just that falsity of supply and demand. The fact that they're...
Hello, Magnus.
He's outside, he's a miserable git. The fact that it always looks bad when people who couldn't get the book then have to buy them secondhand. However, it makes it look like there's this huge disconnect between the amount that were printed and the demand. And that's very rarely is it that bad. Because if it was that bad, these books would be selling for more than 150 or 200 quid. Because someone would be willing to pay more. That it seems to me the numbers are within the hundreds, if that. Kind of
I've got a few rarities in my collection, not necessarily Heresy related, but the crazy days of when you could get £1,000 plus for a copy of the Gothic and the Eldritch, the Jez Goodwin sketchbook.
I wish I knew those days because
they're gone.
Oh, big time!
They're gone. But
Yeah, you know, and again, that's not because hundreds of people want them. That's because a handful of people desperately want them.
Yeah,
you know, that's a fundamental difference. So, yeah, you know, it's if you don't get one, it's the biggest problem in the world at that point in time. I appreciate that, but I don't think it's as big a problem. And you know what? There is a chance. Like, I work every other Saturday morning now. On those days, I will be contacting a friend who doesn't collect these books and saying, look, mate, just in case I don't get online to get it, I need you to get it for me. And there's a chance that one day I don't get one. And you know what? Maybe I have to pay 150 quid, but as a collector, that's going to be what I have to do, I suppose.
I have been quite impressed with the way the Siege of Terror books have been marketed for resale online in the Facebook groups, where there's been a lot of people who've been saying, you know what, I've read this, I've decided I'm not going to collect all of them, I'm going to let it go, but I'll let it go for what I paid for it, or like a little bit more. There's the Facebook market for it, or people trade in them. So that other people have got the chance to experience that nice folio volume. I've been really quite impressed with that.
There are some good groups out there, and it's nice to see. It is nice to see, but we've been talking for quite some time. This episode is going to be fairly long, considering what it's about. But
oh God, we've been on for an hour.
Exactly. So thank you for coming on, Rob.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll shut up now.
That's all right. No, you won't. You just keep. I just won't be recording you.
Right.
And we'll speak to you again at some point soon. Anyway.
No worries.
All right.
Thanks for having me on.
No worries. We'll come back and we'll be talking with Michael. And welcome, Michael.
Hello.
We're going to be jumping back in, continuing our conversation from last episode, where we went from books 1 to 30 in the Horus Heresy mainline series, and we told you whether we thought they were required reading or like additional reading or not necessary. I don't know. We never came up with the title for the third one. We were being kind.
Yeah, I guess there's essential from a narrative perspective. There's the sort of additional reading because they're just damn good. They're really good stories. They're well written. And then there's
the rest,
which variously contains sort of story, like standalone arcs which don't impact the rest, arcs which are really interesting but don't have a wider impact on the series.
All the way down to not a great book that doesn't impact the series.
Yeah.
But yeah, so everything else is thrown into that final. This, again, just to reiterate, this is if you wanted to only read the key elements to make you understand the heresy in as short a book span as possible, this is what we would say.
Yeah. I think about 30, we said 12 of those were essential from a narrative perspective, with a further 6 that just really good, and add those in if you can. So I mean, even that 18 of 30, just over half of them, you think, great, that will speed it up, but it is still a lot to read if you were to be starting now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got, say, books 31 to 54 to go ahead. Quite interesting how many anthologies there are in this section, and that's obviously because they've collected a lot of the stories that were coming out in that first period.
I think for quite a long time in the early days of the series, short stories were available first in the anthology. Tales of Heresy, Shadows of Treachery, quite a few of them, they were published as anthologies first, but then there came a point, and it would be interesting to pinpoint when that started, when digital short stories started coming out, limited edition anthologies, various methods of getting hold of this. And BL said from quite an early point that those, alongside audio dramas, would eventually become available in print. This idea of every story in every format. So prose version of audios, short stories, obviously had to get rolled into the series. And so this whole second half-ish is really interesting. As you say, lots of anthologies contrasting with this idea that BL was sort of responding to some loud voices in the community who are saying we want the plot to move forward faster. So I think there's a bit of a tension there between those, because the anthologies, for the most part, with the greatest will in the world, they don't move the story forward in the way that a novel will do. So you've got sort of two things happening at the same time. You've got that forward motion, but you've also got that wrapping up of bits and pieces that a reader might not have come across if they haven't been following every little bit of information.
Yeah, and it's an interesting kind of dilemma that they then get, because, as you say, this desire to finish the series meant that because of that statement, we do get, pretty much every other book for a while.
For quite a while. The first 2, 4, 6, 8 go anthology novel. And there's, of these, 24? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think 10 of those are anthologies. Yeah. Plus Garrow, which I think you call a novel because it's not exactly an anthology.
Yeah.
So 11, arguably. Maybe then, I think I included Korax and Talarn in there as anthologies, but that's a large proportion of those.
Yeah. Plus, we've got 3 books outside the numbered series, in the Honoured and the Unburdened, which are short novellas. Yeah. And what was the other one that wasn't included?
Well, there was Sons of the Forge,
yes,
but that did get wrapped back up into Born of Flame.
Yeah, so we got the Honoured and the Unburdened as well in there, which again we might as well do them now by dint of what they are. They're covered in Calth. They are nice little extras.
Exactly. I mean, I wouldn't even. I thoroughly enjoyed both of them, but I wouldn't even say they were essential in telling the Calth story. Once you've done Know No Fear, you read Mark of Calth. That covers a huge amount of what's going on there, especially if you were to go and then maybe read the graphic novel Macragg's Honour. So those two are cool, short novels, but absolutely not essential.
Absolutely. Should we dive straight in?
Yeah, with Legacies of Betrayal, book number 31.
Yeah, I had to look up what stories were in this, because it's been quite a few.
Lots of really interesting ones. And this is a good example of how quite a lot of these anthologies were short stories that had been digitally released, but also those prose versions of audios, which then take up a slightly different sort of complexion. So from those audios, there's Veritas Ferrum, which was a short one, David Annandale, Butcher's Nails, War Master, another short one, Strike and Fade, I think, maybe a short one, Hunter's Moon, Censure, Thief of Revelations, Honor to the Dead, Lone Wolf.
Can't remember now.
Maybe even a couple of other really short ones. So lots of audios in there.
Yeah.
And again, I think by dint of what they are, the audios tend not to be the sort of stories that move the narrative forward. I think you'd be hard pushed to say that Butcher's Nails isn't one of the best stories, sort of side stories.
As an audio or as a prose?
Either way. I mean, I suppose I should say a caveat of personally, I think they should all be listened to as audios. I think they're better in that format.
I think Butcher's Nails and Honor to the Dead, particularly those two. If you're not listening to them, you're doing yourself an injustice.
I agree, but if you really don't want to listen to them, fine. They are there in prose. Yeah. They're damn fine stories, but neither of them. Butcher's Nails, more of the two, but they're not really designed to move that narrative forward.
No, absolutely.
So I don't think any of these really. The only story in there which I would suggest might be kind of crucial for a big arc of the series would be Brotherhood of the Storm, because that, I think, if I get my timeline right, that was the first White Scars book that Chris wrote. So he wrote that before Scars.
Yeah.
I might have got that the wrong way around. But it's a prequel to Scars, and it leads into it, and it sets up those characters. Do you need to read it to get Scars? No. But it does. It turns that Scars, Path of Heaven, into a really nice sort of trilogy.
The only other point is Lucius, the Eternal Blade. Is that the one where he ends up where he ends up?
Yeah, I think that's right.
One of the confusing things is Lucius appears in which book is it? Crimson King.
Crimson King.
And a lot of people are like, why is Lucius here? And that story explains why Lucius is there.
It does. I mean, there's lots in here. I mean, Censure, the Aenid Thiel audio, that's part of his arc.
Yeah.
I mean, even things, Butcher's Nails and Heart of the Conqueror, Veritas Ferrum and Strike and Fade both lead into Damnation of Pythos. You've got Thief of Revelations, which ties into Arum and Magnus.
Yeah.
All of these, very few of them are genuine standalone stories. They're all part of character arcs. And as with a lot of these short story anthologies, like if you have the time for them, they'll give you a lot of texture and a lot of detail that you don't get elsewhere. I would always say read them if you can, but I don't think I would put this in the essentials for the narrative, but arguably for the sort of great stories either, because there's not enough in there that are standouts, I don't think.
No, that's probably fair enough.
Great, really good. Worth reading if you can, but no.
Yeah, indeed. Book 32.
Deathfire by Nick Kime. So this is book 2 in the sort of Vulcan trilogy within the Heresy.
Yeah.
So I think we talked last time about how the Salamanders are sort of one of those legions where they inevitably don't play a huge part in the Heresy. And that you sort of have to look at it objectively and take that as a given. That just is what it is. Vulcan, on the other hand, Vulcan himself might yet play an important part.
Yes.
We don't know. That we'll find out during the Siege of Terror. So from a overall sort of Salamanders perspective, if you're a Salamanders fan, you want to read this because it's a crucial part in the journey of your Primarch. For everyone else, at the moment, it's sort of hard to say that would be essential. If you really loved Vulcan Lives and you want to know the next step, read this, move on to Old Earth.
It's pretty tightly focused as well.
Very tightly focused because it's a sort of A to B story, really.
Yeah, and apart from there's a small couple of cameos in there which lead in have continuation elsewhere. Yeah. Although like Magnus makes a very small appearance, he's covered. That's covered in another story, so you're not gaining anything majorly from that. It very much is a contained Salamanders story.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not even a Salamanders Legion story, really, is it?
No.
It's a Vulcan story.
Yeah.
So look to the Shattered Legions arc for more about the Salamanders as a fighting force. As a legion, this is one of 3 Vulcan stories. Cool. Worth reading if you love those, or if you just particularly enjoyed Vulcan Lives. But I don't think it sort of fits either of our criteria for going on the list.
No, absolutely. One of those books that certainly caused quite a segment to of the readership to kind of not complain, but voice their issues with it. As well, so that's but that is what it is at the end of the day.
It is what it is, and I think all of this. We're looking at a very focused thing of if you don't have much time, what do you do?
Yeah.
If you broaden that out at all, it comes down to do you want to feel at the end of every book, every story that it's moved one step further to the Siege of Terror, or do you want to feel at the end of every story the world of the Horus Heresy has expanded a little bit.
Yeah.
This one, like most of them, to be honest, sort of falls more into the second one of those categories than another. And I tend to think that most of the people who are grumbling about it probably, I mean, they have a fair point that it doesn't feel like it's moving the narrative onwards. It's just, to the rest of us, that's not really important.
Yeah, and you're not... Although there is a journey from Unremembered Empire, from end point of that to end point of this book, the mechanisms of what we're talking about are covered in Unremembered Empire.
Yeah.
So it's not like this book's truly revelatory in that respect either.
No.
So, cool. We can leave that one off the list.
And then we go on to 33, so that's the next anthology. And I've actually got it in my hands right here, and this is a weighty tome. If I remember right, I think this might be the first one that moved from the curved spine to the flat spine, and that's probably because this is 540 pages long. It's an absolute monster of a book.
21 short stories.
That's crazy. And of those stories, are they all actual short stories or...
Yes,
I think they are.
Short stories.
There's no novellas in here either, so these are a lot of decent length short stories, and a lot of good short stories. Once again, however, I think we're going to sound a little bit like a broken record here.
We're going to do this a lot.
Loads of really good stories, but how many of these move that narrative onwards? I mean, I'm just trying to skim through the list of them. There's a Talon story in there that if you really love that sort of arc,
and it's
quite an interesting one.
So that's not included in Talon then?
No, it's not.
No, but it fits in that arc.
It does. If I remember right, it's essentially the prequel to Talon, and it fits between Angel Exterminatus, or the end of that, and the start of Talon, or the start of the whole Talon arc.
Yeah.
So that's Black Oculus. That's great. Really, really worth reading. But again, not really pushing things forward. A couple of things from Aaron, really good, but not really. What else have we got? I suppose there's Virtues of the Suns. If you're a Blood Angels fan, it's sort of that one. And what is it? Virtues of the Suns and Sins of the Father, which is in a different anthology. They push things on in sort of the Sanguinius and his relationship with his most sort of highest sons, I suppose. But again, I don't think you need it. No,
there's some stories in here which they're taking the opportunity to knuckle down on people who aren't necessarily as important during the Heresy, but have stories that carry on past it, like Cherigen. However you pronounce it.
For Fabius.
From Fabius, things like that. Imperfect goes back over. That's Primarchs, isn't it? But covers a little bit more again of. It's Ferrus. So again, we don't get much of Ferrus, but we get to see a Ferrus. And
sort of.
So there's a little bit of that. Things like Gunsight by Jim Swallow.
Yeah, again, Gunsight fits in between Nemesis and the Garrow bind-up. There's maybe Allegiance, Chris Raitt, because that's sort of, that's his sort of White Scars-ish.
That's
it's not even White Scars, is it? It's Thousand Suns. No, I don't think any of these. Lots of good stories, but once again, probably not enough genuinely great stories to sort of lift it up into that. You really need this anthology to get the best.
Absolutely. There's it's one of those ones, if you do want to follow like the Garrow arc or the Knights Errant arc, then these kind of anthologies become a little bit more important because of that. But obviously, as we said, we just, it's not quite, I don't think it's quite the arc that needs to, is a fundamental part of the Heresy.
No. And I think it's worth pointing out that, I mean, this is an impressive collection. Like, there's a load of great stories and it's massive.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to cover a breadth of the Heresy, this would be a really good one to read because it gives you loads of different things. But it's not a focused anthology. So we'll come to a couple later on, which are essentially themed, and they fit. In fact, there's probably 3 of them. They fit very specific sort of story arcs within the bigger picture of the Heresy. This is not that. Same thing with Legacies of Betrayal. They're collections of unrelated stories for the most part, and that's great.
There seems to be a few of these that really do pay off for 40k fans. Something like Demonology.
Yeah.
And let's say those other character ones. But they're cool, but not really fitting our criteria.
No, and that means we've gotten 3 in without picking one. So the next one's interesting because that's the next novel, and that's Pharos by Guy Haley. So this is part of the Imperium Secundus arc, and it brings in some really interesting characters because you've got essentially the Primarchs on Macragge or around about it, and then you've got Dantioch and Pollux, on Sotha, however you pronounce that, and the Night Lords. And this, it's the story of the Night Lords invading Sotha, and why that's an important thing. And Pharos has some interesting sort of echoes that go on throughout 40k in various ways, whether we're talking the Ultramarines who remain on there. Are we going to spoil who they are? For anyone who's not read it, do we say that? Or who they turn into?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, if you don't want to listen, turn off for 20 seconds.
Yeah, skip it for 20 seconds. Essentially, the Ultramarines who remain at the end of this garrisoning Sotha become the scythes of the Emperor.
Yeah.
And so who are a really interesting chapter, and they tie into that quite nicely. There's also the beacon of Sotha, the idea that it's sort of overloading, acts as a lighthouse, as a beacon to a certain extra-galactic threat.
Yeah.
Which appeals to some people and doesn't appeal to others. That's fine.
For sure.
It is what it is. I think Pharos is an excellent novel. I think it portrays the Night Lords in an interesting way. There's some bits in that which are really quite unpleasant.
Yes.
Which makes the Night Lords, or helps Night Lords not appear like a daft comical legion, but I can see why people would be scared of these. It introduces some characters who show up from a Night Lord side throughout more of the series. And it also, for me personally, has 2 of my favourite characters because the relationship between Dantioch and Alexis Pollux is fabulous. I absolutely love it.
Absolutely. My question is, in terms of purely the Heresy, do we find out enough from Angels of Caliban to not need to read Pharos? Because I think you do.
I don't know. I mean, for me personally, I think I would say you kind of need to read the whole Imperium Secundus arc. Could you leave this one out? Maybe.
I think you can. Essentially, the things that happen on Sotha are fairly contained in terms of once you get to Angels of Caliban, it's like, well, there's been an attack and that's happened. And that kind of does cover it in terms of the wider scope of what that is beyond say, the far-reaching consequences, which are, but they're not. Again, that's not a heresy concern. It's one ending of a large part of. It's sort of the last time we're probably going to see the Legion of the Night Lords together.
Yeah, I suspect so.
In the whatever's left of a Legion in that respect, but in terms of characters going forward, or not going forward, I don't know how many of those are going to have a major part to play.
I think Scrivok probably will.
Yeah, potentially.
But you'd assume that Pollux probably isn't.
No.
So yeah, I mean, I think maybe you're right. So it sort of.
I think Angels of Caliban semi-covers Sotha.
I think you're right, because essentially, at the end of this, you get a certain thing happens, and the repercussions of which are felt at the beginning of Angels of Caliban. So yeah, I think you're probably right. I would personally, I would absolutely have it on the second criteria list, because I think it's an excellent novel, and especially as we've spent a few minutes debating, like, okay, should it, shouldn't it? I think this is one of those read it if you can books.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where if you didn't have Pharos and they'd just written Angels of Caliban, and then you came back and read, and then they wrote Pharos afterwards to fill in that gap, you'd be like, oh yeah, no, that was needed almost.
Yeah, that's maybe a good way of thinking about it.
But it isn't essential.
I'm happy to have it on the sort of
I think so.
Second list.
Again, some quite interesting reactions to. I think that the major, so should we say, the one complaint I saw from this book was the nature or the way that the Night Lords acted, and particularly in the major kind of assault scene, which I think the people's misgivings were misplaced. I think it's easy to. I think they were concentrating on the caricature of a legion rather than the legion itself, or them being a legion. But if that's like the main kind of thing that people bring up as a negative, then I always find that that's pretty cool. And we also, what we get from it is a real look at the Night Lords, who haven't had a huge amount. Like Kurz has had a bit, but the Night Lords haven't had a huge amount. No,
especially not, like I say, away from Kurz and away from Sevatar.
Yeah.
So it introduces some new Night Lords characters who, like I said, are in other stories. I think it's a character-based novel. You're right. Some really good Night Lord stuff. I just keep coming back to that dynamic between the sort of the Iron Warriors, crippled Warsmith, who's an amazing character, and Pollux, who you sort of feel like how are they friends?
Yeah.
But it works and it makes sense, and there's a personal dynamic to it that you don't always get with Warhammer stories.
Sorry, Karen.
No, that was the end of it. Just saying, I think it's excellent. I think it's done really well.
I think it's also one of those stories, much like the scene at the start of Angel Exterminatus. You're watching a legion, or you're watching one of those battles which is not. It's not a primary concern for the Heresy whatsoever. But it's the little reminder of actually all the time they go from A to B along that route. They are destroying stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder of those. Sotha doesn't, they don't go to Sotha because they know what's on Sotha.
No, not at all.
They go there because they can. And that's happening all over the galaxy. When we play our games on the tabletop, a lot of the time we make these kind of places because it doesn't interrupt our own kind of view of the Heresy. We go, well, yeah, we'll make, this planet Jeff A, and it doesn't matter if the loyalists or the traitors win, we can destroy as much of this planet as we want because it's irrelevant in the major thing, really. And this is a show of what must be happening in countless places around the galaxy.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So yeah, cool. So it's a no on the first instance, but a yes on the second.
Yeah. And then we're on to the next anthology. So Indeed. Carrying on the novel anthology setup. Next one is Eye of Terror.
Yes.
Book 35. I'm going to say in this one that this has this becomes closer to something that you really want to read because it has a few really, really good stories in it. So not only does it have The Wolf of Ash and Fire, which is still probably the only thing we've really seen that's fully pre-Heresy, Great Crusade, and B, as the Emperor and Horus fighting side by side. So that will be of a lot of interest to a lot of people. It has that. It also has Aurelian, which is still one of the best novellas in the series, in my opinion, and is an absolute essential. Essential is the wrong word. An excellent read, and fills in a lot of information around Lorgar.
Yeah.
And then it just has a stack of great short stories. Brotherhood of the Moon, which is sort of the aftermath of Scars. What else have we got? Vorax by Matt Farrer, a rare Heresy story from Matt Farrer, but a really cool little sort of Adeptus Mechanicus vignette. It has a couple of the prose versions of audios from Talon series, one of which in particular, the Eagle's Talon, was fascinating, really cleverly done. A couple of really cool little Sanguinius Blood Angels stories. So there's a lot of really good stuff in this. I think, we'll see what you think in a sec. I think for me, it probably still doesn't quite get in there for. It certainly doesn't from a narrative perspective. I don't know. I sort of on the fence of whether there's enough great stuff in here, more than the others we've looked at.
I don't think there is. I thought a couple of the titles were. I clicked on them to remember exactly what they were, and they weren't the stories I thought they were.
Okay.
There are a couple here though that play more into the direct heresy, as you say. The Wolf of Ash and Fire and Aurelian give you an insight a little bit into what's been going on for major characters, for Primarchs.
Yeah.
And Brotherhood of the Moon plays in, as you say, Red Marked and Stratagem.
Yep, for more Aenid Thiel.
Yeah, and play into, give you an idea of how Guilliman's now approaching this war, which is significant. But yeah, it just falls short. Wolf of Ash and Fire is a really cool story. And maybe I don't read it at face value. Whether Graham intended that or not, I think there are some that you can read between the lines in that, and see that there are some interesting things going on from the Emperor's point of view and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's just shy.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Some really cool stuff. I think it's getting closer. It feels at this point that it's still mopping up those stories which had been released elsewhere. And it's still not quite a sort of properly focused themed anthology, which I think generally in the second half of the series, those ones work better, but it's getting there.
Yeah, probably right.
So if we move then on to one of my personal favourites in the series, The Path of Heaven, Chris Raitt. So we spent quite a while in the last episode talking about Scars and debating sort of, is it an essential one, is it not? And I think we basically came to the conclusion that it's if you had space for one more on your essential narrative list, you'd maybe go for that one. But it's definitely on the list of damn fine books. You then come to Path of Heaven, which takes you skips quite a bit ahead from the end of Scars, shows you where the White Scars are after the fact, and then brings them up to the point at which they will shortly become quite important in the siege.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Greg? I mean, I feel like I've talked quite a lot about these things. Would you put this on the narrative essentials?
It's a weird one. There's a lot going on in this book, and I think that's because essentially it's White Scars and Death Guard
and Emperor's Children,
and Emperor's Children, and they're running around the edges of space. However, this is the book that sets up the White Scars for Terror.
Yeah,
it's one of the few books we get a fair bit of Death Guard, even though we don't get a huge amount really, but we get to see them really involved. And then on top of that, you get this whole layer of what? How do you explain it? How the Imperium's being built for the future.
And that's a good way of thinking it. Actually.
It's a major factor in we can read these books. You can take them at face value, and they, and Path of Heaven, it's a great book at face value. When you stop and start considering that final kind of the big scenes in this book and what they potentially mean, then that's when you can have a 3-hour discussion with 3 or 4 of you about what the Emperor was planning, what the whole purpose was, and you can come out of that with more possible conclusions than you started.
Yeah,
and on top of that, I think if you don't read Scars, again, this is probably setting up a meeting between 2 Primarchs as well on Terra, which, so you're getting that. You've got, although, again, if you haven't read Path, you've got the redemption aspect. You see the twin nature of the Scars. So if you haven't read Scars, it's still in this book.
Yeah.
And you're still dealing with all of that. Plus some super cool characters who do appear in this, in the Siege. So yeah, I think it's weird in that it's the story of how the Scars get from point A to B at the end of the day. But there is enough in there, purely on a information kind of point. There's enough in there to put it in, and then add into the fact that it's one of the best books.
Yeah. In
the series.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It is how the Scars get from A to B, literally and sort of metaphorically.
Yeah.
Because they've changed drastically from the end of Scars, but by the end of Path of Heaven, they've changed again. It also has one of the very few, for me, sort of tear-jerking moments in the Heresy.
Sure, yeah.
Chris Ray has the knack of doing this. I read something by him recently that wasn't quite to the same extent, but nearly got me. I don't know how he does it when no one else seems to, but it's impressive. So I don't think we need this on the second list, because I think this is straight up essential.
Yeah, yeah,
cool.
Yeah, and I've said before, I think Chris is the best character writer at the moment in Black Library's stable. Just specifically on that one thing, I think he's the best. But mileage will vary. But yeah, Path of Heaven's totally in there.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Book number 37. Anthology number 4.
Yeah.
The Silent War. Now, I've talked quite a bit already about the idea of anthologies, whether they're themed or not. This one is very much a themed one. In case you hadn't worked it out from the title and the cover, which has Malcador, Severian, and weirdly Sigismund. This is about the subtitle is The Chosen of the Sigilite. So there's a lot of stuff in here around the sort of the fringes, I suppose, of the whole Chosen of Malcador, Knights Errant sort of thing, and a lot of stuff here setting things up for like the calm before the storm, almost.
Yeah. With
the storm being the Siege of Terror.
Yeah.
And this has some of my standout favourite Heresy stories. Luna Mendax. I often really like the quiet, zero action stories that the Heresy can do. And Luna Mendax, which has troubled Garviel Loken basically doing some gardening, pretty much. It sort of sounds like, well, how's that going to work? I thought it was fantastic. Really sort of peaceful, reflective, interesting story. It also has The Purge, which is one of my other favourite of the novellas, and has some genuine significance on the Solar War.
Yeah.
It's got the Sigilite, which, while the cover of the Sigilite was a bit of a Mickey take from Neil Roberts, and so that it maybe doesn't have as many secrets in its pages as some people might thought it would do, is still an excellent story. But a load of interesting things. Templar, again, really good. Distant Echoes of Old Night. Not so much, really, the Knights Errant, although there is a character in there, but very much the sort of Death Guard approach. But I thought it was a really clever story. There's just tons of stuff in here. Child of Night, so I feel like the character, the Night Lord's chief librarian in that story, I'd have loved to have seen more of him. I thought he was fascinating. some really interesting stuff in here, and much more themed, much more focused than any of the other anthologies in this half up to this point.
Yeah, and there's a few stories in here as well which really start to... it's carried on later, but they really start to pull away the veneer of the Emperor and the Sigillite. Which we've seen before as readers. We know they're not like the shining lights they like to put themselves out as, but this is the start of that, them peeling that back. Things like Lost Sons, which I actually thought was... the story was... I enjoyed the story. I can't remember if it was really good or not, but there was information imparted in that in the right way. It wasn't, not just delivered, but there was some really cool information in there which kind of made me go, what does this mean? Does that mean that? And also showed, this starts to show how far the Sigillite's willing to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sort of then leads into that question of how important is Malcador in the story, or how important are Malcador's actions up to this point in the wider story. And we talked a little bit, I feel like we've talked before about Garrow and co, probably when we talked about Flight of the Eisenstein. And obviously Garrow and the Knights Errant, there's a whole Garrow novel to come. They play a big part in the last book before the siege. I sort of feel like some people might say, I'm just not interested in them. And that's fair enough. I'm tempted to say, though, that the Silent War is getting closer to being an essential one from that narrative perspective. I still think you probably could skip it, but I would be tempted to put it in under the great stories list.
Yeah, I think there's added value to it as well if you're going along the Garrow, series as well.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I don't think this is needed because, again, as we stated earlier, I honestly believe that the Knight Errant storyline is more of a 40k storyline than a 30k storyline. So you lose some effect on that, but you do get those insights into the Sigillite.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in agreement with that. I think I forgot how many cool stories were in that.
Some really good ones, aren't there? And I keep coming back to The Purge. Not only does that have one of my favourite covers of all the Heresy books, I think Neil knocked that out of the park. It was just such a surprise. Really, I didn't know anything about it in advance. It was something that I hadn't come across, the sort of concept of it. And then the fact that not only was it phenomenal, but it's had a significance on the Solar War.
Yeah.
Yeah, really worth reading. But let's go no narrative, yes, quality of writing.
Indeed.
And then move on to 38. So we've mentioned this a few times already, Angels of Caliban by Gav Thorpe. I get the sense that you're leaning towards having this as a yes.
I think you need to. I think so. This wraps up the arc of Imperium Secundus.
Well, takes you up to the end of it.
Yeah, it gets you to the moving point.
It does. It does.
And covers those events, whilst also at the end of the day, you've got 4 Primarchs in this that are dealing with each other on, quite an interesting level. They're very much involved with each other
and quite confrontational.
Yeah, absolutely, and that in itself is of value, I think. Yeah. And you get to the point where they have to make a decision, or start that decision making process. So you're starting to see the reasons why Imperium Secundus and why the Imperium needed to be what it was in a sense. You've got these 3 guys here who can't do the job that is laid in front of them for a variety of reasons, and that is that plays its part in when you look at the Imperium. Particularly when you start talking about who should have been War Master, and all that kind of stuff. You've got all of that. You've got Kurz hitting some truths in amongst his madness.
Yeah,
and I think it's it's setting that when we talk about moving the story forwards, this gets them all at that point where they're on that push to Terra.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. There's also some of all the Dark Angels books. This is probably the most sort of information-packed and valuable from a Dark Angels fan perspective in terms of Heresy era Dark Angels. Not so much what they were, what they are, because he really goes heavy into the voted lieutenants and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose as with all Dark Angel stuff as well, this is split. So this is, half this book, its relevance is probably 40k again or scouring. So there is that element of it. But I think bearing in mind we don't put Pharos in.
Yeah,
I think this has to go in because otherwise it's like, well, what were they doing? Why did they stop doing it?
And if you went straight from, say, the Unremembered Empire to Ruinstorm, that's a bit of a jump.
Yeah.
Doesn't give you much.
You'll be sitting there going, but why? What? Yeah. How? There was no. There needs to be when Guilliman decides to set up Imperium Secundus, there needs to be something pretty big to make him give it up, and not as contrived as they find out the Emperor's alive. Just like blah, because that's rubbish. So there needs to be stuff happens, and actually, what happens in Angels of Caliban, although they might be told the Emperor's alive, that's only the smallest part of why they're not doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think it's probably got to go. And I think it's the best of the Dark Angel stuff as well.
I agree.
Which helps.
All right. So 38 is a yes. Book 39, Praetorian of Dawn. Another one of my favourites.
Yeah. Controversial.
However, I think let's just put it on the table. I don't think you can get away without reading this.
No.
I think this has very valuable information, not just character-wise, not just in terms of a big thing happening, but in terms of showing the state of the war at that point, and providing some context to what's really happening at the beginning of the siege.
Yeah. I don't actually think it's that controversial either. I think some people have their headcanon that they, that's with them and they never want to leave it. And I think, whatever, at the end of the day, so you can have your headcanon. It's
that's
just,
the thing.
Just as long as you remember that it's your headcanon and not
exactly
not Black Libraries.
No. And I defy anyone to, hand on heart, honestly say that the sort of action-packed finale that concludes this book isn't straight up awesome.
Well, yeah. Again, I think there's Legion bias here in the people who don't. It's because this book is essentially it's essentially Imperial Fists and Alpha Legion, and I've heard both Imperial Fists and Alpha Legion players, or readers, fans, complain either that their Legion gets stuffed by the writing or that it's because the opposing Legion is written like Mary Sue's on both sides of the coin, which, that can't be right at the end of the day.
I mean, look, I always, anyone who's listened to us talk or read my reviews knows that I always looked for a balanced viewpoint. Yeah. Personally, I think that's utter tripe.
Yeah, so do I.
There's no Mary Sueism in this, but also, I mean, I've heard a lot of people going, but it's supposed to be an Imperial Fist book. Forget about that. There was a point in the Heresy where people were expecting there to be an Imperial Fist book, a Dark Angels book, a Blood Angels book, and for a while that sort of happened. But because it sort of did happen, especially with things like Legion, I think it instilled in certain people this idea that there would be books belonging to them and their beloved Legion, which is just not true. And strip all that away, strip your Legion bias away, try and think about these as a cohesive narrative, as a story, and from a storytelling perspective, that those criticisms are moot, because what they are is they're going, well, I like this person, and I want to make sure that this person always wins and always comes out on top. And I think Black Library maybe used to do that back in the day, but that hasn't really been a thing in the Heresy. And I think I try not to be too aggressive about this, but I think people need to let go of that a little bit.
Yeah,
think about Praetorian of Dawn as a story, as a narrative, and it makes total sense.
Yeah, and you're right. It sets up, John wrote this and Solar War, and it does set up Solar War. It also starts to lay the groundwork for, so we know anyone who's got a brain will know that the way that the War for Terror was written about early on was very, very basic, and that's because it was. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
We live in space is 3-dimensional. So why is Pluto important? Why is Neptune important? All these things. Yeah. This starts to cover that in a way that the Solar War then takes it on even further.
Yeah, I agree.
And it also shows the state of what this kind of war's doing as well. And we also get, this is the real step up. It's the first time we get to see Dawn in his glory. And it nothing goes all his way for sure. But
no, I think John did a really good job of that. Dawn and the Fists do come out in places looking awesome, but he's absolutely not infallible, and there's no way that you could honestly, objectively say that the Imperial Fists stomp all over the Alpha Legion.
No, absolutely not.
Doesn't happen that way. I think it sets Dawn up really interestingly. It also sets up some key characters around Dawn.
Yeah, it also means you can't. This is the book which went. You think you know what's going to happen. Whoa, slow down, Nelly.
That's a fair point, actually. It's been, how long had it been since we last had one of those what sort of moments? Like from Legion or even from the original trilogy.
I think Betrayer, and I think. Well, yeah. Okay. I think the death in Betrayer potentially.
Yeah.
And even then, that's not a character that we knew about beforehand. That had no. We had no preconceptions about that character, so you could go back even further, as you say.
But Praetorian of Dawn genuinely had that moment of rug pulled out from underneath you.
Yeah, which when you're going into an area which, in theory, we do know a fair amount about. There is lots of writing about the War of Terror. This was a reminder that who wrote that. In universe, was that written thousands of years after? Was that written by the winners? Was that written by these people? Be careful, with your assumptions. And so now, when we're thinking about the Battle for Terra, the Siege of Terra, we're like, well, hopefully this happens in some form. But now you're questioning it. You can't get complacent with it.
No,
and that's good, because as readers, we can't assume. We can't sit there and go, oh, this is the bit where he beats him up. But it's like, well, he might beat him up. He might do it in a completely different way to what we're thinking. It might not happen that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I think is healthy for a series like this.
Oh, totally agree.
Groovy. So that's in.
That's in. How about number 40, Corax, which I would call an anthology, because while the stories are all relevant to each other, they're not. They're
independent stories.
They are independent, unlike, say, Garrow, which we'll come to in a bit, which I would call a novel.
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, exactly, just about. Yeah. Corax is a series of connected novellas and short stories. I think we can be fairly quick on this.
Yeah.
If you love the Raven Guard and you love Corax, you have to read this. Simple as, because it's cool. There's loads of interesting things, and then the final novella, Wergeld, sets up a load of interesting things about Corax's sort of physical and mental state at the end of that point and onwards. Great.
Yeah, even more than the other two original Shattered Legions, even more than Salamanders and the Iron Hands.
Yep.
They don't do a lot in the Heresy, bless them. And they get to the point where they definitely don't do a lot in the Heresy. It's pretty clean. Yes, you can have small groups of them, Raven Guard, doing things, but they're not that relevant.
No.
And
as a result, for all that there's some great stuff, especially Wergeld, which I was surprised never got a standalone release, and all the rest did. But anyway, it's just it doesn't link in, like you said, because then they're not going to play a bigger part.
No, there's a couple of pages right at the end, and that's it. It's not really,
No.
It is what it is.
It is, and I think I like the fact that it's a really themed anthology, especially because it's a massive signpost saying Ravengard fan, come and read me, which is great, and it's nice to have that, but in no way essential. So I think we can quickly say that's a no.
Indeed.
What's next? Number 41, Aaron Dembski-Bowden, The Master of Mankind.
Yes, it's in. Move on. So this is not only... right, we talk about books moving towards the siege. This breaks down like the other, basically it breaks down the other battle that's going on.
It does.
To the point where this shows exactly why Magnus was wrong. And but the effects of that.
It does, and it as well. Breaking it down, it introduces it, breaks it down, shows what's going on, contextualizes it.
Yeah,
it does so much in not that long a book.
Yeah, weirdly, almost at points it trivializes the actual heresy as well, which is really interesting when we're talking about books that are fundamental to the main heresy storyline.
Yeah.
But there are things in here which show you why certain stuff can or can't happen, as well as getting a look or multiple viewpoint looks at the Master of Mankind.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we mentioned before about controversy. There's been this has had in amongst again a fairly small group of fans. This has brought up some questions and some concerns with this. There's a point at which the Emperor and Arcan Land are conversing about, well, essentially they're stood over the comatose body of Angron, on a medical slab. And I think it's really clever personally, because to me it's hitting you over the head going, the Emperor is a different person to each person. Like, that's interesting. That's a really cool idea, and has lots of applications. Do not read me literally. It pretty much has that in glowing letters next to it. Some people perhaps took it a little bit more seriously and a little bit more at face value. Therefore, controversy. Bit silly, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the reaction to it was, crazy. It still now gets quoted as this is justification for my viewpoint, or what have you.
But what I actually quite like about it is that it kind of can act as justification for your viewpoint, as long as you're prepared to accept that your viewpoint is one of many valid viewpoints. Yeah, and that's where unfortunately a lot of these people fall down. Exactly.
But yeah, it's certainly it's one of those things when we are always, there are always going to be 100 million different ways you can read why the heresy happened, how it happened, and everything else, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. You can pick and choose parts of this book to justify theories and what have you, but what again it can do is open that question.
Yeah. So I think I'm in agreement. It's beautifully written, some fascinating stuff, some wonderful characters. I personally love Arcan Land. I think is it Zaphen? I don't know how you pronounce the Blood Angel.
Zaphen, yeah.
He's fascinating, and there's a very cool short story with him elsewhere in another release. On top of all of that, it's total badass. Some awesome stuff going on, and all of what you've said about that sort of contextualizing and that putting the rest of the heresy in relation to what's going on beneath the surface. All the ticks, fabulous stuff.
Yeah, definitely. It answers some questions as to why couldn't the Emperor just? And there's lots of answers to that. We've been chatting for quite a while, so let's have a very quick New School intake. Well, we're back, and we're going to move into book 42, Garrow.
Garrow. So I think probably we've talked quite a lot about Garrow and the Knights Errant. I think I love the arc. I think it's fascinating. I think Garrow is a great character. I also think you're right, though, that the not necessarily Garrow himself, but the overall Knights Errant arc is setting up 40k events more than it is anything in the Heresy, for fairly obvious reasons. By the time you get to the Buried Dagger, I think Garrow is a really interesting one because it's a bind-up. So it's essentially a novel made up of a number of shorter stories sort of linked together, I think reasonably seamlessly.
Pretty well. Yeah.
Great stuff, but relating it to the overall forward motion. I mean, it does have forward motion for Garrow's story, and Garrow is there right to the end, right up to the Siege of Terror, and probably in the Siege of Terror.
Yeah.
But
things like which one's the story where he rescues the woman?
Shield of Lies?
Yeah.
I can't remember which one's which.
Yeah, I think it might be Shield of Lies. So that story is purely a vehicle to show you like what the Sigillite has planned for the Knight Errant. And that's and it's really cool, and I really enjoyed it. And when I worked out kind of where it was going, it was like, yeah, this is awesome. It's not a Heresy story, and I don't think it's going to have any payoff. So to read a whole book for Garrow, the character himself, we already know who Garrow is if we've read Flight. Yeah,
and I think we'll probably end up saying, come to this in a bit, that the Buried Dagger is an essential. And there's a lot of this stuff pays off in that.
Yeah, that's true.
So you'll get that. The only thing that I'd maybe from slight question mark over is the stuff about the Saint, because I feel like she might have more of a role to play still.
Maybe, but then
but we don't know that, and I don't think that's enough.
No, I think if they covered her again, it's been a long time since she's been in books.
Yeah, so would you put this on the second list?
That's an interesting one. Because it's so focused on Garrow that I think it becomes hard to.
I think it is great. There's loads of cool stuff in there. What do you think about what we've put on that second list? We put Pharos. We put the Silent War for some seriously wonderful stories. Yeah. I think it's probably not quite up to that standard.
I don't think it pays deep enough into the Heresy. I think that's the problem. It's too much of a standalone. By its nature, Garrow doesn't play a major part in the Heresy beyond Flight.
Not compared to, say, the Primarchs. I think he plays a comparable role to quite a lot of the other named Space Marine characters.
In a direct effect of the Heresy?
Well, I think because he sort of leads what's going on with the Sigillites, and I think there might be more to come with that. And I think it's important, not towards the siege necessarily, but the sort of context and the subtext of the Heresy.
I would say Loken plays a part of the Sigillites' Heresy plans because he leads. When we look at
Vengeful Spirit,
he's in there. But Garrow is very much about this storyline.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Towards Titan.
Yeah.
So I think it becomes hard then because he doesn't seem to link back in yet until when we got to the siege. So I'm sure he's going to be there doing something or dying or whatever. What have you.
I think Garrow's awesome. Personally, I kind of do hope he dies heroically in the siege. I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
But just putting that on record, hopefully that happens. Sorry, Garrow. Cool. Well, I think we're happy to leave that off.
Yeah.
We've now come to an anthology. We've had a couple of sort of novels, 2 novels in a row. Now we get back into some anthologies. Shattered Legions. We certainly talked quite a lot in the first episode about the Shattered Legions as a whole. This is another nicely sort of themed anthology. But in its nature, even more than any of the rest of them, it's contributing towards that narrative sort of dead end. Yeah. In as much as cool, like some really great stuff in there, really, really not much impact on the series as a whole.
No. You're probably right. It's one of those ones, I suppose, because you're going through, if you haven't read much about those three legions particularly, if it's something like Meduson.
Meduson's definitely worth reading. Yeah. And there's some cool stuff in there.
Absolutely. Keys of Hell is
Keys of Hell,
fantastic.
That and probably Riven, both by John. That's not in it, it's from a different anthology, but they're really interesting. It's got the Seventh Serpent in it, which I enjoyed massively. Grey Talon, lots of really good stuff in there. I mean, probably Meduson the most, but it's leading towards the Shattered Legions moving yet further away from actually impacting on the main arc.
For sure.
So I don't think it can be on the list.
No, absolutely not. But I think if you're an Iron Hands fan, go read it.
100%. And it is probably more Iron Hands than anything else because they've essentially taken up the bulk of the Shattered Legions arc at this point.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's probably right. Like if you're a hardcore Ferrus and the Iron Hands fan, this should be near the top of your list. For everyone else, it's cool additional info on a side story.
Definitely.
All right then. Next one is another novel. Book 44, The Crimson King by Graham McNeill, which has been quite a long time since Graham had contributed much, certainly in a novel.
Well, yeah, this book was, a year plus late, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
This was started before the Black Library issues that they had, and was a victim a little bit of that, and finished when he was working over in the States, which again wouldn't have made things easy for him to do, working the full-time job and writing on top of it. It's an interesting book, Crimson King. I don't know. I didn't find this to be as on the same level as some of his other Heresy stuff. For me, I thought it was a bit convoluted, maybe, or just complicated, maybe.
It was quite complicated. I feel like if you compare it to A Thousand Suns, it's a very different type of story. I mean, The Thousand Suns are in a very different place.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been influenced quite heavily by John French's Ahriman series.
Right, yeah.
I think it leans more to that style of storytelling than A Thousand Suns does. If you are interested in A Thousand Suns, it's a bit spacey. It's a bit full of mad magic psychic stuff, which, I mean, I quite like. It goes quite heavy into the Ahriman and Ammon characters. Lots of really interesting stuff. And it absolutely gives you some really interesting context around what's driving the Thousand Suns and Magnus specifically by the end of that book to sort of properly join in with Horus. Because up to this point, I mean, they've been on the planet of the Sorcerers. They have not needed to get involved. Magnus is not really in the game, but we know that they were a terror. This book, in my opinion, explains that eventually, but I don't know yet that that's sort of an absolute necessity to know it, because they probably could have guessed that they'd be there. I think it's a tricky one.
I'm not so sure. I think when Magnus shows up, I think there's possibly some explaining to do from his part, or certainly that there can be some like do the other guys know exactly what's going on with Magnus kind of thing. So I think it can be handled, and possibly will be kind of handled in that aspect. What you do get from this book is lots of information about Magnus, his character, about the Thousand Sons character that leads into a fairly large number of storylines that are smaller but no less kind of impactful in a way for the wider 40k settings, for things like the Ahriman stories going later
massively
on, for the Knights Errant particularly. There's and talk about a book that feeds into the greater 40k kind of discussion topics. Then this book's up there as one of the most filled kind of things, and Graham can do that at times, and that's sometimes it's done better than others, but there's lots here that you can again sit down and talk for hours about. But at the end of the day, the Thousand Sons are going to join the fight.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, I come at it from a perspective of the Ahriman books are some of my favourite of all time in BL. And I devour any little snippet about those characters. I particularly like the dynamic between Ahriman and Ammon. It's the two different approaches to essentially trying to look after Magnus.
Yeah.
There's tons of good stuff in there. I think you're probably right, ultimately. It could be, this is one that could at some point come back to be something that is referenced, but there's probably going to be enough exposition. Like you say, when Magnus turns up, because Ahriman is in the Solar War, but I don't think I didn't feel like
his character's not different enough from the Thousand Sons Ahriman.
No, and it also it doesn't feel like, well, hang on a minute, why is he here?
Yeah,
you sort of. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And even if you didn't know anymore, even if you just went from the end of Prospero to this, like, I could accept that. It's not the cleanest kind of journey, but you could get away with it, even if. But most people will know there's a little bit more to it than that anyway.
Yeah. And I think, as we've said with other Legions before, if you happen to be a particular Thousand Sons fan, there's quite a few little short stories and audios that you're going to want to read, and you are going to want to read The Crimson King. But for the rest of us, I say the rest of us, for everyone else who's not a hardcore Thousand Sons fan, I think you're right.
Groovy.
So we're on to the next anthology, which is Talon by John French.
Yes.
Now, so this is made up of two novellas, or a novella and a short novel, depending on how you want to look at Ironclads, and a few short stories. Weirdly, not all of them. So we've already seen that Black Oculus was in a previous anthology. The two Talon audios are in a previous anthology. So it's sort of all the Talon stories without actually being all of them. Yeah. I guess it's the main thrust of it.
Yeah, and and it is, Talon is one of those planets that ultimately is just another planet on the way to Terra.
Interestingly, we talked last time about there were a few named sort of systems that were fought over, Cygnus Prime and Calth and that sort of thing, and you could argue that Talon was on that list.
Oh yeah,
but it doesn't have the same impact, or at least it doesn't yet, and I don't think it will have the same impact as the others. Certainly not something like Calth or Prospero.
No, Talon's kind of fame came from the fact that it was a meat grinder. Its biggest impact on the Heresy was to slow down those forces involved, but also bring them all into one place and allow massive slaughter to happen.
Yeah.
It could have been, from the way this story is written, there was that opportunity for it to be a bit more, and that's what this story kind of covers. We see into why that could have happened. I think it's fantastic. Talon was Angel Exterminatus started to make me like Perturabo. Talon made me want to collect an Iron Warriors army.
Really?
Yeah, and then the Primarch book showed me the other side of Perturabo.
I knew you were going to say that.
And got rid of that desire at all. But the Perturabo in Talon, I think, is fantastic, and shows the Iron Warriors doing what they do really well, but also shows a Perturabo who you can understand, and it shows the Iron Warriors that you can understand as well. But unfortunately, they by the time that everyone moves on from Talon, a lot of people are dead, but not a lot's changed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think there's no way we could realistically say this is an absolute essential book. Because, yes, it slows down Perturabo and whatnot, but if you didn't know that Talon happened, if you went from the end of Angel Exterminatus to, I suppose, Slaves to Darkness, you wouldn't think, oh, what's Perturabo been up to?
No, yeah, absolutely.
It introduces Argonis, who comes to have quite an important part to play in Slaves to Darkness.
Yeah, I don't...
But I think that's about the closest thing to it. How about criteria number 2? Do you think it's...
I'm on the fence, I think. I think the problem is, so the 2 main Talon stories...
Executioner and Ironclad.
I think they're good. I prefer Ironclad, I think.
Oh, interesting. I think I prefer Executioner.
And maybe that's just because of the characters involved. But interesting one.
I think it's a no on the second one because it's not cohesive enough.
Yeah, you might be right.
It's a sort of anthology which is almost not an anthology because it's almost sequential.
Yeah.
It just, there's some really great stuff in it, but it doesn't make me go, if you don't read Talon, you're missing out on some of the best stories in the Heresy.
Yeah, true. I suppose in many ways it's a bit like going back to where are we? One of the other Legion specific books that we haven't put on there. In that, if you're an Iron Warriors fan, maybe it pushes you to that point, but everyone else, no.
Yeah, maybe. All right. Well, let's leave Talon at that. We'll come to the next novel, which is Ruinstorm by David Annandale. So
again, a book that a book that didn't go down that well in all parts of the readership. Follows straight on from Angel of Caliban.
Yeah.
And carries on that journey. I think there is plenty here. Like, this literally takes you up to the point of the siege for 3 legions.
It explains a huge amount about all 3 of those. Whether you like the mad, epic, typically Annandale scale of the bonker stuff going on or not, the explanation that it gives for the 3 loyalist legions and for Curse.
Yeah, absolutely.
The work it does with Sanguinius' sort of tests of faith. Faith is the wrong... Faith not being religious faith, faith in his convictions. Yeah. I don't think you can skip it. It's the end. It's the end point, categorical end of the Imperium Secundus, and it's the direct bridge between Imperium Secundus and the siege.
Yeah, and it's the end point for 3 Primarchs in the Heresy.
Yeah.
Whilst also deeply covering the doubts and confusions of Sanguinius as well. Yeah, and it contextualizes again. It contextualizes other parts of the book, other parts of the series later on that you're going to read as to, when we get to Horus, why does Horus drop? Well, it's in the siege, isn't it? It's in Solar War, isn't it? The not to give anything really away, but Dawn, the whole aspect of Dawn is how much time can we buy. And that is because he knows, because Sanguinius got there and can say, these guys are coming.
Yeah.
So whether anyone else knows it contextualizes decision-making processes there.
It does.
And that will be, we know from old lore that Horus is feeling that pressure the whole time. So, I think probably, and I think it builds up that Sanguinius' role as well, which I don't think can be understated.
Cool. So I think that's a yes then.
Yeah. I think that's one that people might disagree with us on.
For me in the Heresy, I feel like David Annandale has been a bit underserved.
Oh, yes.
He got given Damnation of Pythos, which was, if you're being blunt, was a dead-end book. It's cool. It's a horror story. It doesn't feel like a Heresy story like the rest of them do. And then he got given Ruinstorm, which was a tricky thing to cover all of that information and make it a compelling character story, and make it interesting so it's not just plod. Yes, we're going through space. And I think he did a grand job with it. If you don't like his approach to sort of the warp and psychic powers and that sort of stuff, I understand how it might grate a little bit. I'm fine with that. It's just another approach.
Yeah.
It could have been done differently, but it wasn't. I think it does a really good job, especially for, to be honest, the sort of people who tend to complain about that the most, I feel, are the people who are banging the drum saying, I want to know what happens next. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it.
Yeah.
If you what you're saying by saying I want it to be moving on is I'm reading these books for information purposes more than story purposes. This ticks all those boxes.
Yeah, and one of the things that people don't, as you say, there's that mad warp thing. David tries to show how mad the warp is. Yeah, that's a very deliberate thing.
Yeah.
And I wonder if Graham had written almost the same stuff, how people would have taken it.
It would have been longer.
Yeah, for shizzle. Yeah, absolutely. But I think, I think there's definitely an amount of, oh yeah, but Graham wrote that, and David doesn't have that same level of kind of, people treat him differently because he hasn't written, as much in that era, that kind of setting that has developed that love that people have, which lets you get away with, lets you get away with, but changes people's perceptions of what you write.
Yeah, he doesn't have the historical fan base that Dan and Graham do.
Yeah. It is mad. It is mad.
People might disagree with us, but hey, this is our list. Yeah. So come and talk to us in the comments or on social media if you disagree.
Yeah. And we could get some. Cool. Book
47.
Old Earth. So the accumulation of, the last part in the trilogy of Vulcan.
Yep.
But alongside that, the Shattered Legions under Shadrach Bloody Meduson, or Meduson, should I say? Oh wow!
And
and the Cabal and
the Perpetuals.
And the Perpetuals, yes.
Which, to be honest, came as a bit of a surprise to me that there was so much wrapped into this.
Yes.
Let's take them one at a time. From a Vulcan perspective, I think it nicely wraps that up. And it's probably the most important of the three books because, as we said last time, Vulcan lives. You can get the gist of that from the Unremembered Empire. This sort of is Vulcan's end point, and we see him, I suppose, start to take up the mantle of what he was really designed for.
Yeah.
Whether there's enough in that to make this an essential read, I find difficult to decide.
There's potential that if a Vulcan appears in the Siege books and you haven't read this, you go, what?
And I find it hard to believe he won't appear.
Yeah, I think that would be a mistake. So you have that. You have the kind of final blow to the Shattered Legions.
Yeah. Which, if you're an Iron Hands fan, I've heard some Iron Hands fans not be very happy with this.
Yeah.
Personally, as an agnostic, like Legion agnostic, I think it's kind of cool. It would feel a little contrived if the Iron Hands went on to great success.
Not even that. I think it's a little. So if the events of this book don't happen for, for Shadrach Meduson, and maybe the way it happened, I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit too Game of Thronesy for some people, but there are 40k Iron Hands, and then there are 30k Shattered Legion Iron Hands under Meduson, and he doesn't his influence obviously doesn't go through to 40k.
No.
So something has to happen to have worn that down, and had this not ended in the way it did, then it would need some big event somewhere else to then need to be written about to get it there. So it makes sense that it happens. It's a bit like Space Wolves. Like, and a lot of Space Wolves fans go, "Why do we always lose?" And it's like, well, A, you don't always lose, but B, you need to go from Legion size to large chapter size in the space of 7 years. And there's only one way that can happen, and that's by getting a lot of people killed. And so by dint of that fact, a lot of Space Wolves have to get killed. By dint of the fact that the 40k Iron Hands are the 40k Iron Hands, they can't be led down a different path.
No.
To because it just won't fit. So I think there's an element of that. And Meduson was one of my favourite characters, actually. I thought it was fantastic.
I agree. Really interesting.
Anyone who can scare Horus. And then you have the Cabal Perpetuals bit as well.
And Eldrad Ulthran.
And Eldrad, yeah. And that's interesting to see exactly how it all feeds in. It's an interesting one, Old Earth. It really is. I'm not sure. Maybe this is the first time we've got to a book where I can't fully judge it until we've finished the siege.
I think you're right. It's tricky to say, because you feel like you could probably get away with not knowing the Medusan arc. The Cabal themselves could probably get away with not knowing about it. The rest of the Perpetual stuff, tricky to say. Vulcan, really tricky to say.
Yeah,
I probably enjoyed this the most of the 3 Vulcan books.
Yeah.
It wasn't, however, one of my favourites in the series. It was one that, as I was first sort of thinking about this, I probably skipped over and then put a question mark next to it when I went back. And as we've been talking about it, I think we've been thinking, oh, actually, how about this and how about this? I'm tempted to put it on the list simply because it's setting things up which let's face it, the conclusion to draw is we think there probably will be implications.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those ones. Is this essential? No, unless...
maybe no this minute, but probably by the time the siege finishes.
But actually, Vulcan could do this. The Perpetuals could be here doing this. The Cabal could still play a part. The Shattered Legions thing is it's that whole Corax thing. It's the finalising of their issue. That's fine. That's cool. But I think maybe it's a speculative yes, because I would like to assume that we get a big enough payoff for Vulcan and for the Perpetuals.
Yeah.
And if we don't, then I'll be disappointed.
Well, I think that goes in as a yes.
I think that's maybe.
I think you're right. It is sort of speculative.
Where we had what's its name with the other book as a. If you had to add one more, add it in Scars, was it? Yeah, it was Scars, wasn't it? I think.
I think this takes a slightly different approach. I don't think it's if you can really cram one more in.
No, I think this might be the one that we then remove at the end of it.
Yeah,
potentially. It could be the other way round, but we just don't know yet.
Well, we'll put an asterisk next to it.
Yeah,
effectively. Next up, The Burden of Loyalty, another anthology. So it's been a couple of books since we had an anthology after Talon.
Yeah.
The Burden of Loyalty then was quite interesting. There's a cool cover with Titans. Titans are awesome. And then this is, again, a couple of novellas in this one. Few prose versions of short stories. Some really interesting stuff. So novellas, Cybernetica and The Wolf King. Cybernetica I thought was half a fantastic story and half a bit of a waste of time. Yeah. The Wolf King's fabulous, absolutely fantastic. The Binary Succession audio drama, brilliant. The Heart of the Pharos, really nice little extra snippet at the end, sort of carrying on from Pharos. I am tempted to say with this one that once again probably doesn't give you enough narratively to need it. Maybe The Wolf King, could argue, but probably not even that. But from enough good short stories and novellas, I think this is probably the best of the recent bunch of anthologies up to this point.
There's some crackers in this. So Wolf King is like
so good.
Yeah, and there'll be some people listening to this saying, "What are you talking about? They ruined." I think I just can't help but think you're completely wrong for those people. I'm sorry, but Wolf King shows one of the very few times we show a Primarch who is absolutely self-aware.
Okay.
Which Jagatai does it a little bit, but we almost get a Primarch breaking himself down. Which
I think at this point the Legion are as down as they've been.
Yeah, and takes the time to be so introspective and particularly for a Legion where all the criticisms is you just do what you're told, you lapdogs. Like Wolf King just tears that apart in that respect because it's just fantastic. I think it's one of my favourite novellas in the whole series.
Yeah, agreed.
It's really up there. Things like Into Exile.
I had that on my list. That's so good.
So well written. And Perpetual offers up a vision of something that's completely different.
Yeah, and this probably does move that part of the narrative on.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about, I think it's possibly like Ordo Sinister. Like there's an aspect of the lore that we haven't looked at yet, which has potential to play part coming up to getting understanding of that. Heart of the Pharos plays a little bit into that kind of other 40k storyline, but offers some really cool insight. There's potential for this one to almost go to be the first anthology that has elements that push towards being important.
Yeah.
As well.
Well,
I
would definitely put this up there as a from a sort of writing standard and quality of story perspective. Yes, categorically. There's too many good stories in here to miss out on.
I think so. Yeah.
I still think probably not from a narrative perspective. Just not quite enough.
No, it's not quite enough. But if any of these anthologies are pushing that way, I think this does more than almost every other anthology to flesh out and to build up to events that are going on.
Yeah, I think there's one more that's comparable, which I'll come to in a bit, but you're absolutely right. Next up then is 49, Wolfsbane by Guy Haley.
Yeah,
You're a Space Wolf fan, yes or no, on the narrative side?
Oh, yeah. This is...
Thought you might say that.
This is fundamental, I think. Well, yeah.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I think it is. For a start, it's Horus again.
Yeah.
Like it's not directly Horus, but it's Horus. And secondly, there's events in this that surely are going to be handled and looked at and viewed upon. In fact, this story angered people because they thought it reduces Sanguinius's impact moving forwards. But we also get the point, like the heresy could have ended. In one form or another in this book. And the reason it doesn't end is also more heartbreaking in a way, but also offers up, again, a whole host of possible reasons or possible ways that the end of the story can play out. And then it finalises the Space Wolves. Again, you need a reason why the Space Wolves aren't there on Terra. This is that reason. There's a lot going on here. And then on the side of that, it's also starting towards playing into the 40k as well.
Yep. There's also Call, Belisarius Call in it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Who almost stole the story for me. I thought it was fantastic. I also particularly liked Guy's stylistic approach to the Space Wolves, where he took quite a sort of almost poetic approach to them. I thought his writing really suited the subject matter. Really cleverly done. Yeah, I thought you might say yes. It was an instant yes on my list as well.
And it's also in that direct timeline. I think that's not to be underplayed in this.
That's a fair point.
When we talk about moving the story forwards, we are now at the point with Wolfsbane and then looking at Slaves to Darkness in a couple of books' time. It's like we're going in direct order how you would expect a series to plan out normally.
Well, I think we can quickly move over book number 50. It's another anthology. Briefly mentioned it before. This is Born of Flame by Nick Kime. So this includes the Sons of the Forge, which is a sort of short novel that sees a Salamander's character go off on a tangent, and then a few other bits and pieces. This is straight up Salamanders fans, yes. Everyone else, cool. There's some interesting stuff in there, but in no way is this directly impacting on the forward motion of the Heresy.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's much to say on this one, because we've talked about the Salamanders loads. I don't think this needs to be read from our criteria.
No, absolutely. I completely agree.
So I think if we quickly skip over that, because I think it makes sense to go from Wolfsbane to Slaves to Darkness.
Yeah.
Which there's no way in which this isn't an essential book. It absolutely is, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it fundamentally sets up the siege for four or so, maybe more major legions and players, and we have fallout from Wolfsbane.
Yep.
We have machinations within the traitor legions themselves, which
really shows some interesting stuff around Horus's grip on his brothers, and the nature of that, and what that means, and why he's having to make some of the decisions he's making.
Yeah, absolutely. It brings people into position, and some of those people who were problematic, like Fulgrim, particularly. Which there were questions over kind of how do we get there? They're not as into it as others are.
But on that note, it also then poses some interesting questions that I hadn't really thought about Lorgar.
Yeah,
really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and moving forwards from all of that, when we get to Terra, it also poses questions about what actually is going to happen.
Yeah,
because of the nature of the way they were all brought together, and the things that happened in that book, like Lorgar and the Word Bearers, like Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children. We know, like, if you know the old lore, the Emperor's Children have a good time on Terra
by their standards.
Yeah, indeed. So, like, all of that stuff, Angron, where he's kind of, we get all that kind of feel about all this different stuff. And even to the point of that reassuringness of Perturabo and Mortarion compared to these guys, you can see why Mortarion is where Mortarion is, because he's reliable compared to everything else. So again, we're talking about another almost Nexus novel as well. I remember I said on the review when I talked to John when he was writing this, I was like, "So having fun with this book?" And he's like, "So many characters. Like, which ones do I leave out? It's a headache because you have to."
It is that Nexus. We sort of had Nexus novels largely from the Loyalist perspective, with things like Unremembered Empire. This really brings the traitors back together, doesn't it?
Yeah, big time. And and it's that music's building. The tensions building before the siege as well. I think that's not to be underplayed either.
Not at all. And to top it all off, very cleverly written, really nice stuff. Classic John French.
Yeah, absolutely. But we got another anthology, the last anthology. Next,
we have
Heralds of the Siege.
Heralds of the Siege. And I would say that this is very similar to The Burden of Loyalty in that, not from a novella perspective, but quite a lot of really interesting short stories. So the theme of this one is the quiet before the storm completely. It's the last moment of quiet before the siege lands. There's some interesting stories of the sort of the gradual build-up, but by the end of this book, you've had probably half a dozen that really are, from a loyalist perspective, they're literally, looking to the skies, waiting for Horus to appear. So that's what it's sort of setting up. It's a very focused, themed anthology. And then when you think about stories like Now Peels Midnight and Duty Waits, which are all about the sort of horrifying sense of tension amongst the defenders, you've got The Board is Set with Malcador and the Emperor sort of essentially discussing strategy, but also thinking back about what's been happening. You've got Last Son of Prospero, which is just such a brilliant story, which probably ties more into the Knights Errant than everything else, but still amazing. You've got Magisterium with Valdor and Russ and the sort of dynamic there. I just think these are magnificent. So many great stories in there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we have so many questions in here that are generated from this about the whole heresy. We're getting to that point, and it's like, hold on, where were the mistakes? What was going on? What was the plan? All those kind of big bomb drops that don't explain anything, but they allow you to decide on stuff. Plus things like duty weights, where you're getting a feel of not just what the Primarchs are thinking, but the state Terrazin at this time as well. This is a real... it's that quiet before the storm. Again, to use Game of Thrones, it's that... What I can't remember what the episode was called, the third episode of the last season, where it brought all those characters into one place.
Okay.
And that's probably my favourite episode of that whole season, was setting all the pieces up in a way where you were like, hold on, okay, something's happening here.
It certainly does that, because there's loads of interesting things sort of slightly prior as well, isn't there? There's Dark Compliance, which gives you an insight into where Horus is at just before that happens. Yeah. There's Children of Sicarus, which is an audio transcribed into prose about Corferan and the Word Bearers. There's Exocytosis, which is sort of, I guess, fits just before the Buried Dagger. There's the Soul Severed with what's it called, Eidolon.
Yeah.
So many little things. Yeah, like you say, getting the playing pieces on the board, and then literally the board is set.
and even Dreams of Unity, like
I loved that,
getting all the pieces into place.
Yeah,
and then asking the questions of why everyone's here.
Yeah,
and is Horus the main bad guy? Is this manufactured? Is this fixable? Is this, could we have played this a different way? All those things are coming in, and we're we're a couple of books away at this point from the siege starting, which is a great time to do all those things. And there's a lot of novels. There's a lot of stories in that book.
Do you think there's enough from the narrative perspective, or are we going with the storytelling?
Storytelling is not essential. None of this is essential. All this is going online to read the wikis after the show's come out. This is all that kind of jazz. This is so you're watching it and you think this is the reason, but I've read this little bit over here, and I know the real truth, but except no one does, because the board is set and whatever can be read in about 15 different ways.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably is, actually, looking back on it. And the problem is I never read these, I read all these stories independently of each other.
Yeah.
So
me too.
It's only going back and looking at it. I think of the anthologies, and I remember some of the weaker ones in the middle. War Without End, not even that. It may be, I'm trying to remember. Like the Primarchs is always one that sticks in my brain. I said that. And I think a Mark of Kauth, which is different, and think actually, it's an anthology. But when I actually looked up Heralds of the Siege, I was like, wow, that's an anthology.
Seriously. Some great stuff in there. So we'll go with a no for narrative, but a yes for sort of just great stories. And I think that's appropriate, because if you think about it, The Burden of Loyalty and Heralds of the Siege, the last two anthologies, there's a ton of great stories in there. So if you can stretch away from your pure narrative and onto great storytelling that gives you context, they're really worth checking out.
Yeah.
But back on the question of narrative, I think the next one is very interesting, Titan Death. I remember reading this. I picked it up at a weekender. I read it about the next day, and I loved it. I loved every page of it. It made me immediately want to go out and paint a bunch of Warhound Titans.
Yeah.
because they're super cool. But I was like, why is this happening now? BL have acknowledged that they weren't going to do it. So it does feel a little bit crammed into the order. And I feel like what a lot of people were hoping it was going to be was to really contextualize and show the scale of Beta Garmin. And it doesn't do that in the slightest, in my opinion. It shows small parts of Beta Garmin and just how bad they were, but really doesn't go into the big picture of it. So for me, I think this is one of the few areas where I will happily say that I think BL missed a trick by not properly doing Beta Garmin.
Yeah, I think they left it too late. And, the story is it came about because it was asked for at Weekender, to the point where they went, oh, maybe we should have done it.
And I think they absolutely should. They should have said, yes, we'll do Beta Garmin and we'll push everything else back earlier, like before people are asking for it. The fact is, they didn't. I would suggest that it's a great story, especially if you like Titans. I think Titans are awesome. I like how guys combine the awesomeness of Titans with a really strong character arc in there with the Legios. But while it's one of my recent favourites in the series, I don't think I would put it on the essentials list from a narrative perspective.
Not at all. What you need to know about Beta Garmin was that the Loyalists piled huge amounts of firepower and destruction into that setting so that it wouldn't happen on Terra.
Yeah.
Essentially. Even when Sanguinius makes his appearances in here, there's some nice little bits comparing himself to Horus and things like that. But and we get to see him be an absolute, awesome badass. I think we're going to get a fair amount of that in the Siege anyway.
I suspect so.
So
how about the other criteria then? Do you think we've mostly picked anthologies actually in this second half of sort of extra things to add on from a storytelling perspective and a good writing perspective? Would you go yes for Titan Death?
No. I think this is the summer blockbuster book.
I think that's probably fair, actually. That's a good description.
Sit down with your popcorn, read this book, get loads of awesome explosions, see some cool characters, have a blast with it. There's nothing too deep in here. There's nothing that will make you stop and reconsider the heresy at any point. There's nothing like that. It's a set piece, which is handled very well. I really enjoyed it. Go and read it, but you don't like when we're comparing that to books like Scars. Looking back at what we've put in there, Prospero Burns, Pharos, Legion, Flight. It doesn't compare to those.
No, I think that's right.
On that kind of level.
Okay, then. So that only leaves us with one more. So The Buried Dagger, the final book before the Siege of Terror by Jim Swallow. Yay or nay?
It's an interesting one because, again, half the book is that knight errant story.
Yep.
Which, by the way we've been doing this, isn't fully relevant to our...
I would suggest that I think we've been fair, but I think knowing the conclusion of it is still kind of important.
I also think it shows us, because we haven't been reading many of these shorts, it shows us the Sigillite.
It does.
In not all his glory, there are people who are working for him who are not happy and everything else.
That's a fair point, actually, that if you think about the books we've picked from a narrative perspective, there's been very little of the Sigillite in them.
And I think that's because he is that shade of grey. So,
he's in the shadows, isn't he?
Yeah, you can read the Heresy and the Sigillite can sit apart from it. And you will get the facts of the Heresy. And then you put him in and he warps everything a little bit, but not enough. So he might, if you go and read all the Sigillite stuff, and then you might believe that actually, okay, so I think the Heresy happened for these reasons, but that doesn't change the fundamentals of the Heresy, because Horus believes it happens for these reasons. So in Horus's mind, he's doing this Heresy for reason A, and potentially putting the sigillite, reading the sigillite's version of events, it could happen for reasons A, B, C, D, E, E, or F. But Horus still thinks it's for A, and that's why he's acting.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. But you do get a bit more of him in The Buried Dagger.
And I think that is fair enough. We also get, this is the first proper Death Guard.
Yeah.
Let's have their time. And it's weird because in a way I want to say no because the Death Guard turn, and that is this book, and there's not a huge amount more than that. But
it gives a lot of his backstory for Mortarion, doesn't it?
But we get a lot of that, and also we haven't seen them, and if they just turn up Nurgle, you'd feel a little bit left out. Hold on, we got to see Fulgrim in that. We get to see Angron, and we get to see Magnus. So it's almost only fair that we get that, but also we do get that final point of. We had it with Slaves to Darkness, but here's Mortarion. Here's his first in command. They've got a rope. They're pulling in different directions, but sort of forwards. And that sets that up as well. So I think probably, it's an interesting one, Buried Dagger.
I think it needs to be in there. I think
possibly right. Yeah,
you just miss out just enough.
Yeah.
But there's also, it does give a nice sort of sense of closure to the sort of pre-siege bits.
Yeah, it feels like that book that sets up the big series. And if you have, we've seen little bits of Loken, of Garrow, of enough of those characters dotted around that has enough weight, that storyline, I suppose. So I think we can put it on there. And bearing in mind that's the 9th book of the second half out of, what was it, 23?
24.
24, sorry, yeah.
Well, this comes back to that thing we talked about at the
it?
start. This idea that this sort of second half, yes, it was speeding up towards the siege, but it was also bundling up all these short stories. If you take out the 9 or 10 anthologies, if you make this more like closer to sort of 15, 16 novels, then 9 is actually a pretty good ratio.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And 9 really good books with a lot of information, some really interesting sort of moments and movements of characters.
Yeah, for sure.
And then that gives us out 54 books. That gives us 21 that you and I have identified as essential, with a further 10 from the sort of writing, storytelling, excitement perspective.
Yeah, that's not bad, is it, from 54 books?
Not at all. 21, 31 if you go with the extra stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of books, but
it's still a lot of books.
Bearing in mind we've cut that down from, as you say, from 54, that if someone was serious to read a big series, and bearing in mind that these aren't, there are some big books in there, like Thousand Suns, Angel Exterminatus was pretty
Vengeful
beefy.
Spirit.
The Vengeful Spirit, all Graham's books. But when you look at some of the others that aren't huge.
Runestorm, for example, is really not a long book.
Yeah, and you compare that, if you were to compare that to like Wheel of Time as a book series, you'd probably find that those 21 books are
not dissimilar in length.
Yeah, to the Wheel of Time series, and people will go back and read the Wheel of Time, every couple of years or whatever. So I don't think it's an unreasonable amount for a fan to go and read.
No, well, I mean, it's also been really interesting, I think, for us to revisit it.
Yeah.
I have a strong suspicion that when the next 7 Siege Terror books are finished, we'll look back at this and have some slightly new opinions.
Yeah.
So maybe in a couple of years we'll revisit this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be at least a couple of years, I'd have thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll see. We'll see what else they're doing with the Heresy as well.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole load of Primarch stuff as well. It might actually be interesting when all 18 or more Primarch books come out for us to sort of... It's going to be a different approach, isn't it? Because they're not tied to a narrative. But by the time they've finished and the siege is finished, we maybe can take a different angle to say, okay, in terms of understanding the whole picture, what else is really valuable? Because you can look at some of the Primarch's ones, which have been very much pre-heresy, and then you've got others like Kerr's Say, which is really post-heresy.
Yeah.
So maybe that will be quite fun to do.
Yeah, it could be, because some of them definitely weigh in more. Compared Guilliman to Jagatai, as to how much influence that has over the character or your. But
also
of the
some of the short stories and audios. Think about First Lord of the Imperium.
Yeah,
I think that will have a different complexion by the time we've seen more of Malcador.
Yeah, There's lots of ways we could look at this series. I mean, even if we broke down this series on their effect on 40k.
Oh yeah, that could be quite good fun.
That's a hell of a different. All of a sudden there's a lot of different weight in a lot of these books. You're looking for very different things.
Mm.
But yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot here.
There is. I hope this has been interesting for people to listen to. I'd love to know other people's opinions. So hopefully, if you do listen to this and you've got any thoughts, or you think we've been stupid and missed stuff out or got things wrong, or just want to debate it, come find us on social medias. I'd love to hear what other people think, because it's been good fun bouncing our ideas around. But I think, Greg, that you and I are largely quite similar in viewpoint with the Heresy.
Yeah, we're not too far off each other.
No. So it'll be interesting to see if there are people who have got different approaches.
Yeah, and no matter how you do this, you can't appeal to everyone. We don't try.
No.
We try and give a fair as possible opinion of the books. Obviously, that comes from a position of being fans and and wanting to be positive as well. Critical where required, but positive. But I think we've given them a fair shot. I think
I think so.
It would be easy of us to have put a lot more on that list. I think we've kind of narrowed it down quite well.
I'd love to put him on the spot, and I'd love to say, Nick Kime, like, what are the top 10 books that you think a reader should 100% read and no way skip if you wanted to read the whole of the Heresy series? I'd love to put someone like him on. Nick's such a pro. I think he would not want to answer that.
No, it would be hard to. I mean, at the end of the day, I left Prospero Burns off this list. Without an argument. So
I think we've been as objective as we can be.
Yeah.
But I'm sure people will have different opinions, so I'm looking forward to hearing those and chatting about them.
Definitely.
Hopefully, there's some good feedback.
Yeah, we knew.
I can definitely say it's been a good fun experience.
It has. We knew it was going to be not a quick experience, but we talked for the best part of 2 hours just on these.
It's flown by
4 books. So there's plenty to be going on with. This episode is not going to have much more else in it. So, but I think it's been good. It's been fun for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Right. Well, we should probably leave it there then.
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Well, we'll speak to you again soon about something, I'm sure.
I'll look forward to that.
Done. Cheers.
Cheers.
And you've made it to the end of another episode of The Imperial Truth. Thank you for listening. Before I go anywhere else, we are really in the run-up to the event, the Reckoning of Dallum Prime in Cardiff. There are still tickets left. Sub one today, which is pretty cool. You can come along on the August Bank Holiday weekend in Cardiff, as I say. You can find the page on Facebook, or you can go to theimperialtruth.com. In the top right, there's a button for Alan Prime. There's a pack there. The way to get tickets is written in there. You just have to read the pack. I might have to re-look at the way I do that next time, but yeah, feel free to jump on that. But I don't want to hold you up too long, because it's been a long episode, and if you've listened to that, thank you. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to do with Michael. If you have your ideas on what we've discussed here, or you think we've got something blatantly wrong, again, you can comment on the show note, on the thread that will be on Facebook on the post for this episode, or you can send your thoughts into greg@theimperialtruth.com, and of course you can get hold of Michael at the Track of Words on Twitter, or me at Child of Fang, or the show at imperial_truth. If you would like to support the show in any way, then we have a Patreon. If you really do like the show, you can come and support us on there. The links for that are in the show notes. We have t-shirts. The links for that should be in the show notes as well. I need to try and get on. There's another design I want to try and get out there at some point when life gets a little bit more chilled out, I suppose. Maybe after July, it will be a little bit easier to get some stuff done, but I want to get some more t-shirts up there. If you feel free, each item should have a UK and a US kind of option, which means basically they're distributed from those different, they're set up differently for pricing and everything else as well. So whichever side of the pond you're on, you can do that. Oz, unfortunately, anywhere like that, it's a bit too far for them, I believe. And there's always good old iTunes leaving reviews is always wonderful to see as well. Oh, just before we do go, I did get an email off someone. We've not given away... Well, we did a charity raffle a while ago, which included a Primarch painted by Neil. There is another charity raffle that we will be involved with coming up in the not too distant future. I'm going to get all the details sorted, make sure it's all together. We work out everything that's going on before we kind of put all the information out there. But keep an eye out if you want to win some. Have a possibility of winning an exquisitely painted model. Then keep an eye out on the social medias. It'll be all over. We'll be talking about it on the show as well. In fact, I might try and get Neil on to discuss it when we're in a position to do so. But I thought it was quite exciting, so I wanted to kind of put that out on here. Why not, eh? One thing we are doing is we're going to leave it a little bit because of the DMD raffle that's going on. So obviously that takes up quite a bit of bandwidth, as it were. And we have the telethon coming up on August the 10th as well. You know, it's been fun to be part of the last couple of years doing that, even getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever time I did the other year. It was still fun. Bless them, and there's a good bunch of people all involved with that. But once that's, we might announce this before that, but it will run at a different time from that. So everyone's not, jumping into their pockets all at the same time. But I'm going to leave it there because, these outros can drag on. And I need to go and read up about Inquisitor Eisenhorn making it to the small screen. So until next time, you have been listening to The Imperial Truth.